Okay, so Richard, we met within the last month or so, and I was immediately taken with the size of your vision, the scope of it, and then, you know, I meet a lot of visionaries that aren't able to follow up, and everything that you said you could do, you not only showed, you just showed in real time. So, why don't we go back to sort of the dawn of your vision for temtum and how it's going to, you know, disrupt the global payment system, because that really is your goal.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, so this starts off, this has been about 5 or 6 years in the making now, this project has been. Started off with the foundation of a PhD. We looked back then at other cryptocurrencies. Back then there wasn't many. We only really had Bitcoin, there wasn't even Ethereum back then. And straight away we saw that as Bitcoin it couldn't really follow through as being a payment system, even though it was at the time still a payment system rather than the store of value. We saw issues like the speed of this, send transaction a second, the security was very poor as well. My back had been a lecturer on cryptography, I like latest of cryptography. Implementation was quite poorly done back then. And then you had the resources as well, even 5, 6 years ago, I remember there's a situation. I was mining in the office, and I was responsible for a 30% increase in the school's computing energy resources because of the computing power in the office. So that's not sustainable. So since then we went out, redesigned everything from the ground up. So brand new architecture, brand new protocols, proof of work, no proof of work, no proof of stake, with a very unique consensus model, brand new architecture, how to solve blockchain. And we developed this to where it is today, which is a full working system. And it's been designed though in such a way which anybody can use this. So if you've got a feature phone in Africa that has only SMS features, you can use this. If you've got a server first rent, you can use this as well. And this uses less resources than the Facebook app on your mobile phone. So everybody who's got Facebook uses around half a gig, 1 gig storage. This as a full node would use about half a gig, and you'd be fully able to participate in the network. So this scales up very quickly.
I remember one of the statistics you were giving too was that, you know, Bitcoin now I think uses the energy of entire countries. I think Denmark was one of them. And this entire network at full scale is the energy of about, what, 2 households?
Yeah, that's the source. So we'd be able to run 10,000 nodes, so same as Bitcoin right now, but we'd run it at 120,000 TPS all year long, rather than Bitcoin 7. And we would have the average US household of 2 people. That's the amount of energy we would use. And so it was very easy to be carbon neutral and offset that.
Now, you skipped very fast past that 120,000 transactions per second. I mean, that's a giant leap from anything else we're used to talking about. I mean, obviously, 7 transactions per second for Bitcoin. You know, it's fine if you're being a store of value and you're doing most of your trading in centralized apps that are kind of off-chain. But, you know, the original version, I don't think anybody really other than the complete maximalist ever did, was just buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin. I mean, yeah, send $10,000 internationally with Bitcoin for 20 cents, great. But you literally can go and buy a cup of coffee with a QR code, and it settles in seconds, and it's provable on the blockchain.
Yeah, so right now, maximum would take 12 seconds. It would normally confirm under this. There is no transaction fees at all because of how cheap the energy and how cheap the network is to run. So there's no transaction fees. And yeah, anybody, you can send as low as 1 cent. This has been designed for micropayments to be done over any device. And yeah, 12 seconds later, you get your coffee. And that's actually quicker than...
Can you sell less than 1 cent?
Yeah, you can. That was 1 cent right now is just what we've done. Okay. We could go down to 12 decimal places, so we could send fractions.
It's obviously thousands of a penny, which is great for real-time applications of micropayments. You know, a future with machine learning making payments to people not to be mean. So what's the vision of getting from sort of working in the lab now and launching the first web wallet, which is, I guess, today or tomorrow, it's testing right now today?
That's live. So we did a small soft launch of the web wallet on the weekend, and now it's fully deployed now. So anybody can go sign up and have their first online wallet We also have offline wallets as well, and desktop wallets on the GitHub page. But the web wallet is now for anybody to sign up.
So you just go to temtum.com.
Wallet.temtum.com, and you can sign up. Just sign up, you do, and you now have the ability now to see the speed and start playing with Temtum off an exchange, which is quite a useful tool just to understand how quick this is. So when you sign up, send some Temtum to your mates, and you will see under 12 seconds it's confirmed. Your mates have got it in their account. It's that quick.
And I thought one thing also was interesting, particularly, complete 180 degrees from Mr. McAfee this morning. You have KYC AML on every wallet when you end up getting into the app stores. You're working on your Android app now, and that'll be coming out in the next few weeks.
Yeah. So there's two versions of Android wallet. Light and full mode with a cool keyboard app, and the iOS one. They should be in the next few weeks. They've already coded. They're just final. We making them look cool, making sure final bugs, ready for launch.
So most new payment systems, including Bitcoin, are chicken in the egg. It took Bitcoin a year and a half from saying, hey, mine it and they will come, to someone actually making the first purchase in August of 2010, which was 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. For that to be a great deal. Although I think he was happy to eat pizza at the time, he was getting a lot of Bitcoin because he was a GPU miner when nobody else was doing that. What is your path to onboarding? Because right now, you did a very small IEO in CoinAgenda. You're not available on American exchanges yet. Obviously, that's one of the things that you're in places like here and other places to make deals to be able to get listed. Because it's already built, it's already working. You're not raising money to go and build the product. You're obviously a bunch of lawyers here can give you opinions on any little dots you need to dot or cross or whatever. But right now, how many countries can use you for payments once the ships, and then where do you see you getting into the U.S. and Europe? Europe would be already, correct?
Yes. So right now, the only 3 countries that are excluded are the US, the Chinese, and the Russians. And that's just because they are Coirolo's restricted areas. We do have Liquid joining us now as an exchange. That's happening in the next few weeks. We have OKX lined up as well as another exchange lined up. So really well onboarded exchanges relatively quickly. They love the product, they actually come over, it actually works, and the use cases for us already deployed. So in the next few months now, we should see an onboarding process here of larger exchanges, giving more people access to it. But right now, anywhere in the world bar, those 3 can use Temtum and exclusive.
And so what industries are you seeing to get your first million users?
So right now we started a partnership with Roulette, they're an online casino, one of the largest in this space. And they brought us around 40,000 users. And we see people now go away from traditional crypto like Bitcoin because it's too slow. It takes them an hour, 2 hours to confirm the transaction fees. The gamblers here in the online games would like instant confirmation, so instant withdrawals. They just gamble with it, put it back on a wallet or an exchange. So we're seeing online game esports as well. This is a very hot topic for us at the moment. So these are just 2 areas which we've got immediate use cases for. And we've got wider vision use cases as well over the next few months, which will really have millions of users rather than just 1 million. We've got a country lined up with 16 million people. They will be onboarded.
Well, that'd be revolution. There's a lot of people who are talking about getting countries onboarded. And I know that's been part of your original game plan. It's obviously will be news when it's announced. That's a very large-sized country. I mean, the Marshall Islands just announced they're going to have their own sovereign currency that's going to be on the blockchain. They have, I think, 50,000 people in the country. 60 million would be pretty impressive. And obviously, all 60 million are going to use it at once. But if it's something that is a penetration of cell phones in that country of even 50%, it would make sense, particularly if the government then says, hey, you're on, you want to get your check faster from the government, if you're on some kind of socialized medicine or subsidy, get it through your wallet. I mean, that obviously is an amazing way. Now, So here, as I recall, they're not going to actually receive temtum, they'll receive like, Egypt coin or whatever. It's not as big as the 60 million, let's make a country. And then that would be interchanged within the network in real time for temtum.
Yes, so all the transactions would happen through the temtum network. Any fees, bank fees would have to be paid through temtum. So while they would not receive temtum, the entire back end and how everything's settled uses the temtum network. It's just a different optics for the coins they get.
And that, as a private company, is basically how you make money because you have no money on, you have no fees on the actual cryptocurrency, payment currency. So anybody who wants to take and receive and use temtum without having to be a direct, national government or OEM white label platform can just simply, and everywhere in the world except for China and the US, hopefully it'll be changed soon, and Russia, just download the web wallet, soon the iOS and Android app, and you'll have a directory of merchants.
Yeah, basically, that's where it goes. Yeah.
And what kind of response have you gotten from, I'm trying to think, other than, obviously everything tends to start with sex and gambling. But then after that, what's the next big sort of, low-hanging fruit? Would it be e-commerce? Would the Amazon of different countries look and say, hey, this is great, we can save credit card fees?
So yeah, we're looking straight into debit cards, credit cards. There is a way now which we've implemented, so we can take transactions through the temtum network, temtum to fiat as well. So you can start using a temtum credit card, debit card, and pay for goods and services, and then the Amazon would get fiat. And this is not a prepaid system anymore. This is live through the networks, the clearing bank. So this now would allow anybody with temtum to go spend it in a way in fiat, if they wanted to, or then when through adoption, then they'd be able to take temtum directly. So it's first way getting temtum into the hands of many, then the retailers then would take temtum directly.
Now I've noticed, when it was Bitcoin and Ethereum, there were numerous attempts to try to go and onboard millions of users, and because they usually had to go and touch Visa or MasterCard at some time, they get to a certain size and then they pull the license because they were threatened with their 3.2%. Now here they're going to still get their 3.2% from the merchant side, and will they still feel threatened, or do you hope that you'll at least be long enough to convince people that they can just simply download an app and just get paid direct and get the money immediately?
Well, the conversation so far has been very positive. They've been talked to, we engage with them straight away. This is why it's just engage with them. So we engage with them, they seem all right with everything they say. They still keep the percentages, they don't really mind that. The way to look at this is an FX transaction rather than replacement. So by the time it comes to merchants already accepting payments.
So similar to me going and buying something in France and having the choice of paying with US dollars and having them do the conversion, or saying, yes, I'll pay for it in francs. And, yeah, okay. In fact, in some cases, some of the credit cards will actually make money on the spread for those things. Okay, that's interesting. So, let's see. What countries are you, other than some of the ones that want to do national currencies, what countries are most open, and are there any ones that you fear, other than the ones that are outright, not allowing you in yet, are going to act like, oh, you're a Libra and we think you're going to threaten our currency? I mean, France, for example, would come to mind. They don't want Libra.
No, I think Libra and us are very different. For example, we don't have the animosity that had against Facebook. Facebook's got a very bad reputation at the moment. We've straight away like, this is a payment token. We're not trying to hoard data, not. This is just a utility for people to use. So far it's been very well received. Some of the conversations we've had, they love the technology. This is a technology play rather than outright currency replacement. So this has been well received so far. We haven't had any negative issues around regulatory issues or implementation as well.
And then for merchants who say, temtum schmemptum, I want francs, I want dollars, I want euros, francs, Swiss ones, I guess. Are you working or starting to work with, we do have founder GoCoin in the room, BitPay, Coinbase, You're starting to work with payment processing, crypto to fiat companies?
Yes, so that's part of the debit credit card system we've got in play, and it will allow crypto to fiat interactions there. So the merchant will get their fiat, so we can handle that.
Okay. But if they're not using a debit card and they're just doing, say, an online, an e-commerce, are you working with or talking to any of the traditional kind of fiat to crypto payment processors? They don't have to obviously add you.
Yes, that's conversations we have going there. Payment processors, we've got quite a few conversations going on there again, very possible.
Okay. Let's see. What am I missing here? What am I missing? What question am I asked that you'd like to reiterate about your path?
Well, I know where we've done a small slideshow here, and just was go outside the box. So rather than just have standardized payment systems on that mobile phones, we recently tried it on. So there's two cars.
Oh, that's right, we have a demo.
We got a little demo here. So these are two cars, two BMWs, and what we did, we took the i8 because the i8 represents what we focus on, like very fast, it's very green, and the other one just happens to be another car. So we took it apart, and the aim of this then was just to see if we could get temtum running on these cars. So as you can see, we took them properly apart, just to get into the electronic system on this. And now what we found afterwards was this was not needed at all, but this is just a system to what we've done. And what it allows us to do then is these two cars will act as a full node. So these are just standard cars, and they will be able to run the full network. And this is just a demo now of me doing a transactions test on the cars. So this is starting a speed test, and then the cars themselves will be the ones confirming the transactions. So this now will allow us to have access to, in the UK alone, there's 3 million BMWs, which will be able to be updated through a software update to run this technology. So straight away we can scale this up. So as the cars are driving along, they can confirm transactions on network. As you can see, we're doing around, I think the cars are doing around 2,000 TPS right now, which is, and these are just standard cars.
Plenty fast to go through a toll booth.
Exactly, that's the end goal here is cars driving along, they can automatically pay the tolls, they can automatically pay for road tax, insurance, and this is all within the temtum network. So the network themselves are now mobile.
Gas stations, you're filling up your gas tank, and it's just like you have temtum, boom.
Exactly, it automatically pays. We've got this linked up with ANPR, the recognition cameras. It just automatically pays as you drive along, and the car is a wallet.
And obviously this was an experiment, you just bought the graphics, it wasn't an official BMW, but you obviously could approach some aftermarket companies, or even say, the new Mercedes now featuring temtum automatic payment systems. I imagine you could fairly cheaply install that, technology inside of the car without having the hand ripped out like that every time.
Yes, we found out afterwards all of that is not needed. We can now do it through the development, through a simple software update. So you plug a USB into the armrest, update the car, and you've got temtum now in the car. It takes around 20 minutes to do.
Wow, that's impressive. So that then leads us into the future of machine-to-machine payments. How crazy is this going to get? I mean, with your technology, we've been talking about the smart home for a long time. Would this literally allow you to just sort of, go through your life and just, NFC was promising this, like touch pay. I mean, with machine-to-machine payments and with QR codes, NFC, all powered by temtum. Give us some examples besides what you just showed there of other industries that could be enabled to take friction out of the system.
So we go a little bit, we like research a lot. So not just the cars, we've gone for a Nest thermostat, we got a Dyson robot hoover, and even a fish tank thermometer. These have all been added. They all aim to run temtum. They can all take temtum transactions, and all send. So in the Nest situation, you'll be able to pay for your electricity, live, micropayments, pay as you use. The same then with other smart devices, you pay for what you use, and you can add all these devices onto the network and help secure the network and make it faster as well. So the more devices on the network, the faster we get. So 120,000 transactions a second, that now can scale right up. So we have done it in the lab, and we can go past the 1 million transactions a second and higher as well. So this is not just about allowing these devices to pay for things, micropayments, pay as you go, but also securing and making the network faster, which means more devices come online. You gave them a very nice catch-22 situation.
Enterprise, so not just simultaneous because of machines, but also, say I'm a big company and I've got payroll coming out every 2 weeks and I'm paying 30,000 people. You could develop something on Temtum that would pay everybody automatically and then be done within a few seconds.
Yeah, you can pay everybody maximum 12 seconds later. They'd have the money in their accounts. You could do it daily, weekly, and it would be all automatic.
And so how do people develop things on top of Temtum? Like, for example, there you'd probably have to have some kind of app that would take out the proper taxes, and you're not going to develop that locally, but is there a Temtum developer program, initiative, roadshow, hackathon?
Yeah, so on the site we do have very good APIs and SDKs, all open source. We have a great GitHub. In the next few weeks we are hosting up meetups in partnership with Liquid around Singapore and Tokyo, purely showing how to develop on this, how to get engaged, and how to really start using Temtum. And yeah, the API system always have good comments on this. For example, with the Roulette integration, it took them 2 days to fully integrate the Temtum payment network into the entire casino, which is kind of not heard of for this kind of space.
Well, we're here in Las Vegas, and of course you're not regulated in the U.S. yet, but let's say you get regulated in the U.S. and you get regulated in Las Vegas and New Jersey. I mean, how would this work with, say, casino games with, I suppose you could go in and just, upload your Temtum and collect your winnings. And
exactly. You can go further than that as well. You can actually put the games onto Temtum. Because the speed of Temtum, you can actually have the games automatically run per hand on Temtum, so you have a unique record of this on the blockchain, and then you automatically have your winners or your losses taken away. So you can run the entire game on the Temtum network.
And the Gaming Commission would like that because they can see that nobody's, skimming the till.
Exactly. This is the thing, you'd have a perfect audit. You'd be able to show that it was truly random, it was correct, it's valid, and the correct people were paid, and there was nowhere over the top.
So besides currencies, let's talk about governance for governments. Because Government Blockchain Association, that was in a lot of different cities. They've been talking about, how do we find, like, I'm a resident of Puerto Rico, all of a sudden they were trying to do audits and they're like, oh, oops, I think we just found another $5 million here, another $10 million there, we didn't even know it was there. Do you see Temtum as being something that can sort of, more so than Bitcoin or Ethereum, sort of bring order to financial systems within enterprise, or is that sort of not on the near-term dashboard?
No, that was one of the requirements for these countries we're talking to here, is they are heavily corrupted, is how to get rid of corruption in these countries. And because of the way in which our blockchain chain is deployed, it's very easy to automate a full audit trail on this and actually have a full mandatory log of everything. We know who everybody is on the network, so you start really auditing the network. You make sure the right people are getting paid and the right people are not also taking things on the top. So it's been a requirement from day one with these countries, and it's something we've developed on the chain.
And unlike Bitcoin, also the scaling of Bitcoin from first 100 users to 50 million users has added the complexity of mining from a difficulty level of 1 to I think it's 40 trillion or something now. And obviously you don't have that issue. How about human capital? If you're going to go in and onboard, say, half a dozen countries and have 300 or 400 million potential blockchain users, which would be more than every other cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin combined, do you need to start hiring really fast, or is it mainly the software that's going to scale for you?
That's the great thing about this network, is this scales instantly. So right now we have no idea the limitations of the network can do. So while there is a development cost, the actual implementation in these countries comes from education, teaching people how to use this. But the technology is so advanced on this, it will be able to scale very quickly with little resources in these countries. So we can very easily onboard hundreds of millions of users without even modifying it today. Let alone all the delegation and China protocol we have. Right now it works for its use case.
So oftentimes with blockchains they say speed, security, convenience, pick any two or three. It sounds like you have all three.
Yeah, that's the goal. The goal from day one was it's got to be secure, and this to use quantum security, quantum encryption, quantum source of randomness. We also wanted scalability, because that is literally the foundations here. It's not just scalability in transactions per second, scalability in resources. So the more resources you add to the network, the faster and more powerful it becomes. Something you don't see in any other cryptocurrency. And then actually be able to use this daily, always up, perfect uptime as well. So they were the foundations that we started off with. And 13 research papers later, we've proved each one of them is true for this network.
And no 51% attack with proof of work.
No, so because there's no possibility of a fork, you can't underspend, and you can't 51% this because it's purely random. Our formal models here took us up to 195% compromisation before we even started attacking this. We do have a great AI engine as well behind this. So to actually be malicious as well, you've got to be honest for about 6 months. It costs you a lot of money to run that sort of attack as well. So it's a very expensive attack should any nation state want to try this. This is not a hacker attack, this is a nation state.
So basically you have a lot of open source in GitHub, but then you've got some closed source to prevent the attacking. Is that sort of the mix? Kind of, yeah. We do have AI onboarding the engines, DNS systems as well, which makes sure that the nodes coming on are honest. And while we can't remove nodes from the network, we can say, well, these nodes here, they acted maliciously, this is a proof of this. It's down to your discretion if you include them in your pool, if you like. And tell us about your extra custodianship with the Royal Mint. Yes, when we started off generating the keys, we wanted to put them somewhere safe. So we did our entire cold storage system. We put them in the Royal Mint in the UK, because that is kind of like the most secure place we could think of, and it's very fitting around. You try to bust into the Royal Mint. Yeah. We got bigger issues if you break in there than our currency, so yeah, you've got some great things in there. But yeah, it was a good day, and that is where the keys are stored, offline, cold storage. We took the security seriously and used them. So if everything works the way that you're projecting it, you could potentially have a higher market cap than Bitcoin if people, what percentage of people have to start using digital currency for you to get into like just really large numbers of demand? I don't know the exact figures, but it's relatively small. This is what we find with current currencies, they're just not used. They don't have the daily use case for it, they don't have the daily demand. So, and most of the volume is on exchanges rather than apps. So by being able to run to the use cases we have, onboarding countries, e-commerce, esports, and the online gaming platform, straight away we have a more active user base than the other currencies we've seen actively. Great, well I'm going to take a couple questions from the audience. There's a lot to digest, and I've already heard it before.
I have questions.
Question over here.
So on the 51% attack, did you say it's not possible? I'm curious, you did mention that...
it would be very expensive to do.
Yeah, so the way in which any attack would work on this network, because it's purely random, you have to put yourself in a position and only can act for 12 seconds. So the way the AI engine works, you have to do, there's different tiers of nodes. So you have to, over time now, become, for example, a normal blockchain node. Before you enter eligible to become a leader node. And even when you're a leader node, it doesn't matter then if you've got high resources or anything, it's purely random. So to become any, you have to constantly evolve in the network. So if you just control 51% of the network, it doesn't matter, because you have it takes you 12 months to even become any eligible, if you like, to be in a position for confirming noses or confirming blocks. And in that time as well, they're scale up past what you can scale. And the actual engine behind this as well you wouldn't just be, one node can't just confirm block as well. So you have to have a pool of nodes with a delegation of sharding protocols now. So you end up having to control a majority of pools per cycle. So past 51% is a while, like you have to go past 75, 80%, and you're looking at 99, 95, 99% to actually have a successful cycle block done, which is what would be needed.
Okay, because you mentioned that if there was a malicious node or miner on a node or pool, that you would be able to notify them. But wouldn't it be too late at that point?
No, well, over a period of time, we do several tests on each node daily. You send transactions. You've got to they have to be honest until literally that moment, and at that moment then as well.
But a truly malicious hacker he's willing to conform for a while in order to get in.
So to run this, here's the maths on this now. You'd have to run 95% of the network VPSs, which run about $50 a month over a 12-month period here. And when you're already on as a baseline at 10,000 nodes, and these are increasing monthly, the cost of this becomes, they should say cost, you're talking millions of dollars per week to run any sort of network. And in that time as well, you secured us up. So you're helping us be secure. And the actual end goal of this, you couldn't double spend. You'd only be able to stop the service for 12 seconds maximum. So because you can't fork, because you can't do a double spend, there is no incentive. There is no rewards per transactions. There's no mine rewards. There is no incentive to spend all this cash just to, at worst, stop a 12-second window in our network. And if that 12-second did happen, well, our TPS is so high that any blocks, any transaction that didn't happen in those 12 seconds just happens 12 seconds later. So the incentive for a hacker is zero. The only incentive you have is to stop the network for 12 seconds. It's not a monetary policy at all. There's no monetary rewards, so there is no incentive there.
Take one more question and perhaps a little less technical.
I'm not sure if it's visible from there, but I'm always intrigued by the new spendable transactional currency token. There's a lot of emphasis on the payment system. At the same time, if I'm not mistaken, there's over 120 networks out there, including, from a payment perspective, these would use Samsung Pay, Google Pay, and Apple Pay. And the head-to-head competitions, how are you going to distinguish, how are you going to brand yourself to outpace those? Because they are, including as of this morning, Chinese bank itself wants to get into cryptocurrency payments. How are you going to outpace your brand against those titans who essentially, in the ease of use business?
So right now, we're not going against Android Pay, we're not going against Google Pay or Samsung Pay. This is the technology behind those networks. So while if you use Android Pay to pay for your coffee, if you use Temtum with that system, it would be able to use our network behind it. So we're not going against these networks, we're just offering them a way to accept Temtum for us. So if a certain bank, for example, wants to use Temtum, we can clear it in Temtum as well. So we're not going head-to-head with these guys, because they are, like I said, giants. They offer a very different niche to what we would like to offer as well. So while we have a very dominant technology in the crypto space and in the fiat space, this is not a replace Visa situation. We were different, if you like, aim for our network.
Now again, you may have a small percentage that you're able to replace by you simply go into a place like, a chain of 100 stores or something, and they're happy to keep taking this stuff, and all of a sudden, it's just like how Discovery got it. It's like, hey, we have cash back. You could say, if someone comes in and you say, we accept Visa, MasterCard, and Temtum, maybe you have some cash back, or they do a program or whatever, so they don't pay the 3.2%, so they can also have. Last question for me. Are you able to go in and develop loyalty rewards on top, or this would be basically using the API and somebody else would develop that?
No, this is one of our use cases of former ET here. We have a Formula team involved here which are looking to use temtum as a loyalty system. You watch a race, you get loyalty points for interaction with the teams, which then can be redeemable later on. That's all using the temtum network from the temtum protocol, so we're already doing.
Okay, so it's already in the roadmap.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I am less nervous about blockchain being derailed by quantum now, so thank you. I truly appreciate that. Our next panel is STOs. Is Enzo in the room? Is Enzo outside of the room? Can you stick your head out the door and yell Enzo for me? There we go. I love how everybody's like all camaraderie and helpful. How many of you learned something in that last panel that made you feel like super awesome to be in blockchain? Enzo. No, Enzo? Caitlin, you want to go now? I just thought Caitlin. I have no problem making the executive decision and putting Caitlin on now. If Richard Titus is in the room. Enzo's coming? What time is it? Oh, do you guys want a 10-minute break?
No,
Caitlin. Everybody wants Caitlin. She's one of my favorite people. I had the honor of lobbying with her in Wyoming. I got to see her in full force, in all of her awesomeness, and watching all of these major legislators and the governor just be like fawning all over her. It was great.
Except the bankers.
The bankers will come around. They can't resist you forever.
I was actually talking to a chain pony company.
Are you ready? One of my very favorite people, Enzo, is going to bring up a panel that's going to talk to you about STOs. Some say they're dead, some say they're not. We're going to find out exactly what the state of STOs are, and if you want to do one, I bet they're going to answer that question for you too. Here you go.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about coming in late. I got pulled into the last minute meeting. And then I thought it was going to get pushed to 4 o'clock, but I guess not. So, let's hand out some microphones here. We'll probably share. Oh, I think there's a mic for everyone. Just on that one. So STOs, a security token. My background is in actually equity markets. I was the managing director for strategy at NASDAQ. I've been around exchanges since the late 90s. I've actually consulted the NYC, and now I'm actually working with the guys at OKEX too. So exchanges is kind of like a market nerd type of thing. Like you really like doing it, and you're really into all the regs and everything. But what's interesting is that we do have STOs, and I think that there's a lot of hype about STOs. And what I want to do is I'm going to start off with, I want to know who you are, and I'm going to give you one small question, which should be about a 2-minute answer, and then we'll go into some more of the conversation, okay? So the main question is, with Blockstack getting the Reg A Plus done, and spending a lot of money doing it, do you feel that STOs have a future? And if you see that future, what do you feel the future will look like?
Well, my name is Jason Barkeloo, and I'm the founder of Knowbella Tech. And so we're an open science company that crowdsources scientists around dormant intellectual properties. And we actually filed a Regulation A. We started that process late 2017 and worked very closely with the SEC for about 12 months to put that entire package together. we actually never intended to actually do a Regulation A. There were a number of reasons why. First and foremost, as a startup, doing a Regulation A, you're not going to get D&O insurance. That's actually a big deal. And so that was the reason. Another one was you're capped in the amount of money that you can raise. And so if you're really successful doing a great job, Mark, and say you got Michael Terpin in your background helping you do a raise and you're really successful, you're capped. So that takes it off your plate. And you got to do filings every 6 months, and that's a big diversion. And there's some other reasons as well. But the big upside is that it's a huge validator for you if you've worked really closely with them early on like we did. We only had 57 questions back from the SEC on a Reg A filing. I mean, that's...
It usually starts at about 200.
Exactly, and here it is with an STO, right? So let me now pivot to the block stack question. I mean, that's clearly an outlier. I mean, they already raised a stupid amount of money going into that process. So I think for them, they got a lot of publicity out of it. I mean, immediately they got a Wall Street Journal front story cover for that. So they made a lot of press and publicity out of that as well, and they raised a lot of non-dilutive money as a result of it. So do I think that there's a hype issue and all of that? I mean, there's always is in this space. You know, I come out of the science.
No, really?
Yeah, I mean, I come out of the science world, so, you know, when I stepped out of the science world into this world for a while, I was like a deer in the headlights with the amount of hype that was here. So, you know, so looking at it from my perspective, I think that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity with STOs, and I think we leverage the utilization of the Reg A and the STO in a really smart way.
Great, thank you. Please.
Yeah, so my name is Tron Black. I worked for T0. I work for Medici Ventures, which owns a majority share of T0. I'm a principal developer, but I'm also the lead developer for Ravencoin, which is an asset issuance platform. You can issue assets currently today, which work more like Bitcoin. But the features that are on testnet now, we demoed in the hackathon later this conference, will allow you to do on-chain regulation, which allows you to do some things where the tokens are regulated but not regulated. The tokens will only move between tag addresses. It allows the issuer.
So is you whitelisting?
It's essentially whitelisting, but grouped whitelisting, so that if you did you could build an ecosystem of the whitelisted, which is a little bit different than every ERC20 or ERC20-ish with whitelisting, you know, having to whitelist again for each token. I think that the regulations need to be fixed. They're just totally inadequate for what we're trying to do. There needs to be protections, etc. But they remind me of the red flag laws of the UK, where they were putting, someone had to run in front of a car with a red flag and have an engineer in the back, because cars were just weird. They were noisy and they were confusing the cows, and so we have these laws that are just wholly inadequate and they need to be adjusted. So I think that'll happen over time. The Reg A plus stuff was an attempt by Congress to kind of fix some of these things, but it was given to the SEC, hey, you need to come up with something, the Jobs Act 2012, to fix these things. And then they came out clunky enough that people are like, hey, I can't raise enough to satisfy all these things, so I'm going to stick with Reg T, Reg S, etc. So I think those need to be fixed.
Great, thanks.
I'm Eugene Kesselman, CEO of TapJets, which is the marketplace for private jet charter. It's similar to what Priceline and Travelocity does for all the other sites like Trivago Hotels and every other booking. We do the back end for the charter industry. The industry itself is a gray area, for lack of a better term. So the biggest motivator for us from an STO perspective was showing the investors the transparency into the company. The ICO era has did a huge disservice to the industry, and primarily because none of the ICO investors had any visibility, nor neither the companies who did the ICOs had any commitments or obligations to report to those investors. And when we set out to do an STO, one of our primary goals is to ensure that anybody who works with us has an ability to look at the books at any given time. It's a very transparent business model, and I believe that outside of the blockchain community, the world is becoming more transparent. You can find more things, and I think the companies that make it easier to find more things about them, assuming they run a decent enterprise, right, will win over the millennials who understand that there is a fee to pay for services. They just want to know that they're not overpaying or underpaying, and they're getting a fair deal. So as long as you can stay transparent, the regulations themselves, while cumbersome, there's no doubt to that, but they also hold the companies like ours to slightly higher standard of reporting and decision making. So that's why we decided to go the route.
So I think one of the issues is that there has to be a balance between the kind of disclosure laws and rules and the expectation of the company. If a company's tiny, you can't expect them to do quarterly filings. That's insane. You can't expect them to do things that are normal that a large public company like Amazon is doing. That doesn't make any sense. So I think I've done a lot in that world, disclosure, investor relations stuff, and it's just overblown. It's just overblown. So in the venture world, you have these large private companies that are completely opaque, and they're being sold as private shares through equities and shares posts and all that. So is the STO like a solution looking for a problem? That's what I was trying to understand. Like, to me, I've seen RTOs, you go do the shell game and the reverse merger, you can do that. I've seen, you can go public with like an S1. The Reg A Plus is basically an S1 anyway. And why don't you just go public?
Yeah, so I can tell you that it was a game changer for me. Right? This is like my fourth startup. And first of all, angels always get squashed, right? And so all of a sudden, this is a new asset class that provides a liquidity opportunity for angels in a way that they don't get squashed. And so all of a sudden, I'm oversubscribed in my pre-seed round. First time ever that I'm oversubscribed in my pre-seed round. And now my angel investors see an opportunity ahead where they're not going to get squashed down and they've got a liquidity opportunity. I don't care what anybody says, anywhere, anytime, is a game changer for an entrepreneur. Period.
So that's true. But, so this concept of the security token, do you really need the blockchain in order to do what you just said?
Just like Eugene said, it's transparency.
Okay.
Do you really need a blockchain? Again, let's just play along with the times, right? The blockchain has been around for some time. Delaware, I believe 215, probably attorneys will quote me differently, allows you to issue your stock as a token, or as something recorded on the blockchain. So why would you do it in a typical cap table, right? All we're doing is we're just leveraging the tool.
Yeah, I'm thinking to
expose it to the
true. This is what everyone asks. Why am I doing this?
But the second point here is going back to, is disclosure good or bad, right? One of the things you touched on. And I don't believe that any of the regs, at least from our perspective, is anything different from a sane, sustainable business doing quarterly, monthly close just for the executive team to know how are we doing. Have we made money? Have we lost money? Are we on budget? We're not. What's wrong with sharing that data with investors in a near real-time environment, right? If we're doing bad, we're doing bad. If we're doing good, let's have those conversations. I think what it does, putting on a blockchain does for us, is the investors come knocking and saying how we can help. There are bad months in travel, right? There are months that are down, there are months that are up. How we can help. And then engages the dialogue, right? The whole idea is to viralize the company,
Yeah,
and I
but-
think that's why I don't have problem showing, if you want to come over today.
And the investors aren't actually
we can do that.
altruistic, but the investors aren't actually altruistic. I was involved where I bought one of the largest proxy solicitors. Proxy fights are brutal, and the investors aren't there to be, I'm going to be the activist to save the shareholders. They're basically like, it's like a version of, I don't need to say it, but it's a version of bully tactics, basically, right? So, Tron, I know you're a kind of T0 guy, so you're like a Wall Street guy too.
No, I'm a technology guy. I'm a
Okay.
developer, so I was a developer for T0. The Raven coin is just a technology.
Okay.
It's just a blockchain. It's a permissionless blockchain.
And we know why actually Patrick Byrne wanted the blockchain, and that was to get rid of naked shorts. That was the original idea, right?
That's one of its benefits is that everything's transparent. So it is a transparent cap table. But in addition to that, it's the ability to move these things transparently, and that's really the problem. If it was just a record of who owned what, that's one thing. But if the person holds the keys, they have the ability to move it to their neighbor, and that's really where it gets tricky with for example, an STO, where the issuer issues something, and then they can get in trouble if the person that they issued it to, who may be accredited and KYC and completely legal. But as soon as they transfer it to their neighbor Bob, who maybe isn't accredited, and somebody doesn't know who they are, that's where it gets tricky. Is this on-chain component?
And blockchain can deal with all of those issues. And then isn't there some concepts around, instead of being a kind of equity, it's still a security, but you're getting like a dividend. You don't own equity in the company, but maybe you're getting some special treatment, maybe getting miles for a charter service, plus you own the equity. Is that also part of it? Is that the STO framework can add more little widgets into the offering?
What we did was, and what the SEC really liked about our model was, we actually created a special class of equity that the token holder, if we had a liquidity event of the company, that the token holder would actually get the opportunity to get part of that equity and recognize a payout from that M&A and keep their token. And so that was a revolutionary idea.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, they said, my God, so their 25% allocation of the M&A went to the token holders. So, that was like really cool for them. It really wasn't equity, but it behaved like equity.
Yeah, so, it's an iterative of traditional VC, right? You have different subscription agreements with different term sheets potentially. Just as was mentioned before, you can deal with it with different classes of shares. We have certain subscription agreements that include dividends. As a matter of fact, 100% that we're subscribed include dividends. And again, another opportunity to look at how company is doing and know if you get a check coming, right? So this year, I think all of our investors are looking at about 12% return, just on what we do. But it allows you to then determine some of the lesser involved investor class, right? So there's another class where you only give them certain rights to vote or not to vote. So you deal with this potential of 100,000 or hitting the limit of number of investors you could have, right? So you have to deal with different classes as you put your offering together. And to your point that you were trying to mention yesterday, you also have to have a technology from a blockchain perspective where you can restrict your token, right? Based on transition, as well as integrated with KYC and other processes to verify the accreditation or not. In our case, it was a bit unique because we did a DNS at the same time on parallel single token, right? So we now have to really make sure that we control every release or hand exchange of those tokens, and we get intimately involved in the clearing process of each transaction now as it moves across the shareholders. So yeah, it's burden, but I think it's worth the efforts we're putting into it, and I don't believe for the folks who are trying to do it, there's like really extremes. Some folks, oh my God, don't ever do it, it's crazy and burdensome. but you have to look at the team expertise. If your team has financial expertise on board, if your books are ran from day one correctly, if you're just like going for traditional investment. If your house is in order, then that burden is much less to make an STO than as opposed to you have a great idea, you've been running 200 miles an hour in your garage, and now you want to go do an STO. You could find yourself in the really, really tight corner there, potentially with a lot of violation or potentially action from Securities and Exchange. So just be aware of why you're doing it, I think, and what are you willing to give up, asset-wise or classification class. But other than that, there are ways to incentivize.
So now we have a couple of the ATSs have been approved. I know the T0 was approved.
The ATS.
Yeah, so you can do actually the security token secondary market at some level.
Yeah, I don't want to answer questions about T's. I'm not a T0
Okay,
employee.
we won't go down the road. No problem. I get it. But there have been, like, I think actually Open Finance, and I think what they're basically doing is they're using the ETS internally, so you have to have a brokerage account at Open Finance and you can trade. It's almost like the equity set model where you have to be an account holder. You're still trading on the ETS, but do you expect any type of secondary type of, like, what is your expectations on the kind of how liquid this is supposed to be? Because I think at first everyone's like, oh, it'll be just as liquid as if you're trading tokens on Binance and OKX, and there'll be millions of trades a day and all this stuff. But isn't that really not what this is about?
Well, I actually think there's going to be a major catalyst, and I think Andreessen has something up his sleeve on this. As you may know, there's a new stock exchange just approved that will rival the NASDAQ that he pushed through that actually encourages people to hold stocks longer. The longer they hold them.
It's like staking.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard a rumor from fairly well placed that there's going to be a movement afoot to do something here in the crypto space for security tokens. So yes, right now there's only a couple that are trading, right? But I do think that in the next few years, I think you're going to see some large companies that are going to start moving in this direction, and I do think we're going to see a catalyst that's going to occur that's going to have security tokens trading. That's just my belief, and obviously I believe it because I'm moving in that direction, and I actually have an interest in it, so I'm a little jaded.
So Tron, so then do you think that, like where's actually T0 seeing this opportunity? Do you feel like if the Andreessens of the world get in, and if they figure out how to create an exchange that's actually functional and doesn't become the OTC, dead zone of pink sheet garbage, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I don't want to speak too much for T0. I know they're going right down the U.S. Regulatory route, etc. But I do think that we are speaking specifically about highly regulated environments, right? So the same kind of thing with like lighter touch.
So processing things quicker, getting rid of a lot of the layers. The transfer agency can be a lot more efficient, obviously, all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I think the technology is far ahead of the regulation. I mean, we've already seen, the beauty part is we did get to see this ICO thing. While there were scams and people raising money with white papers and things, but one of the things that I think that pointed out was there is a demand for non-accredited investors to be able to put in $50, $100 and invest in these things.
So what does your venture arm? Are you investing in those types of technologies and those types of process?
Yes, I can't speak more about Medici Ventures. There are categories of companies that we've invested in related to blockchain. So voting, capital markets, which would include T0 and some others, land governance, which is putting land records so that you can borrow against it, etc. Kind of improve third world countries. So there's these categories that we invest in. So it's specific categories for blockchain tech, where we think blockchain technology will make the most impact. So that's what Medici Ventures is.
Yeah. So I actually wrote this little blog thing about. I think actually the people that should be doing where to me the blockchain would exist the best is if it's actually for the public markets, because there's a lot of layers. Like there's the broker dealers really control your stock if you're a retail investor, and you're like hiding behind what's called, it's the client name. And as an issuer, you can't find these shareholders easily, and the filings are outdated. And even on the institutional side, so I used to run a business at NASDAQ, and then afterwards, which is called stock surveillance. It's really for big companies to sniff out activist investors before they come in and start just disrupting the whole place. And it was to know who my top 10 shareholders were, so I could call up the institute, CalPERS, and say, hey, we're doing pretty good, please don't dump all our stock. So I think on that side, I think it'd be great. And I know that the DTCC is working on that stuff, and I even know one of my companies that I'm involved in, they're potentially pitching a part of that project to build it out. But I feel like for the smaller markets, I just don't know, I don't know if it's, I still think it's very hard to find an effective mechanism for startups to get funding, because aren't startups supposed to not all get funded? Like, every startup shouldn't get funded, right?
I 100% agree. So I think I'm going to run kind of an alternate scenario. Had we let the ICO thing play out, we would have gotten a whole bunch of smarter investors at the end of this thing, right? Going, well, maybe investing in a white paper isn't such a great idea. There probably does need to be some sort of regulation, but the delta between kind of this massive financial system and the delta between, like ICOs, there is something in between, and we don't have that yet, or the ability to do it. And I think the Jobs Act of 2012 was supposed to get us there, and really hasn't. And I've seen that like in real time, where people are like, hey, should I be investing? Should I be doing tier 1, your Reg A plus tier 1, tier 2? What does that buy me? What are my requirements? Versus Reg D, Reg S, and these different, they're basically exemptions to the SEC, full S1 registration. And so people were looking at all these different options, and they just didn't work out like I think the intention was. And I think there is something in between.
Yeah, I think he's right. I think that your kind of situation is that so have you done the Reg Plus? Have you finished it?
Yeah, we filed it, got 57 questions back, and as soon as that happened, we went to the 506C. But
so you switched out?
Oh yeah, that was
to a Reg D.
Exactly.
But with the marketing, with the C, so you're gonna go market.
Yeah, so there's like 5 reasons why we did it exactly the way we did it. And fortunately, we're in the Midwest. Fortunately, we were very early. We had a great law firm to partner with. So we had Midwestern legal rates. They took 50% of the cost on. They wrote the first 360 Law article about using this model. So there was, it all worked out exactly the way we intended.
So you raised your, did you do the rate? I know you said that you got the over-subscription on the pre-seed. You finished the raise or not?
No, we just opened the seed. So we're like, as soon as we close the seed, that's going to take us into the STO.
And that's actually kind of accredited investors too, only, right? So the Reg Plus is unaccredited.
It'll be an S and a 506C.
What's your thoughts about the unaccredited investors being able to invest in STOs or even the crypto world?
That's actually what I was going to kind of mention. Is I'm sort of going to fall on Eugene's side on this, because where I'm at on this is I know a professor who teaches trading. He's not accredited, right? I mean, he's a tenured professor, but he's not accredited, so he can't invest.
Well, then he's not that good of an investor either if he's not accredited yet.
I mean, he's not
accredited.
teaching.
I would question his credentials if he hasn't invested enough to become an
I mean, it's really kind of ridiculous that we've got a very sophisticated group of people now who are unable to be accredited, unable to invest because they're not accredited, and so that's troublesome to me. And on the other side of the coin, we need to ensure that we have a validation process in place so that people recognize that we don't have scams going on out there.
So, I just don't want to get into a long answer. How many people contemplating STO in this room? Because not very many. It's a journey, right?
I was afraid.
It's a journey. It's an interesting journey because it has so many layers by the time you get to a decision that you have to consider, and many things happen to you after you make decisions. So I'll touch just on a couple of ones that are interesting. Our research, and maybe it's the space we're in, shows that there's many U.S. households that qualify as accredited investors simply because the incomes have gone up. And as a startup company, high-risk investment, I probably don't want to take a middle, low-income household for a ride on a jet, right, in our case. The rest of that discussion becomes more of, are you going to get in trouble with SEC if you didn't do proper checking, if they're accredited or not, or didn't do proper network? And there's many good attorneys here who tell you just show the liability to the companies that do this checking for you, right? You become a consumer of one of those. At the end of the day, just make sure you don't assume any liabilities for their services, and you're going to be all right? That's part of the journey. However, what the reality is, we completed ours, right, under that scenario, is that you will have then folks who come in, and let me give you a hypothetical example. We had over 500 subscribers of non-accredited, right, with a minimum, I think we had a 10,000 minimum, and 5-6 guys came in and said, we don't want 300 friends in the boardroom. So we're just going to write you a check, you go reject their subscription agreements. So STO, while it sounds like an open game, right, ability for everybody to invest, is still a VC raise that acts, feels, smells, and behaves just like any VC raise that you will do in a normal pre-STO, ICO era. And if you get treated that way, then if you pick the right investors, or you interview them, or you do the same diligence as you would do on a regular VC, then you have no downside. The only other item that worries me is the current influx of exchange offerings, right? Which is kind of a third iteration of STO, right? We had ICO, STO, now we have IEO. I probably wouldn't consider pink sheets as a CEO. So why would I consider listing myself on an exchange or third-party exchange if I have no control of a speculative liquidity that's going to happen and potentially do major damage, right, to my shares? So again, it's just another decision. Do you go or not go? And it's a board-level decision that you make with your top investors and move on.
So here's a really kind of interesting sidebar. I don't know if folks, actually read it here, but Binance said that they weren't charging any fees to Blockstack for listing, and I was still kind of confused by the whole thing when I read it. And then in the filing, it said that Blockstack had paid Binance $286,000. What do you think was going on?
Are you talking about the, because there's exchanges come to you, we dealt with some.
But Blockstack had to do a filing, and in their filing they had to put, I guess, anything that they did.
There are fees. They don't charge you a fee to be on the exchange, or there's transactional fees that are involved now with exchanges?
No, they had to pay Binance a listing fee, and they said that they didn't. So the press came out saying that they paid. So Binance said that they paid, that Blockstack paid them $0, but then in Blockstack's filings, they said they had to pay Binance $286,000.
Right. So I think it's a marketing wordplay. There are fees involved with onboarding to any exchange that I know of. There might not be called an exchange listing fee, but there's due diligence fee, there is a capitalization, equity verification, letter of credit fees. There's a laundry list of fees.
But does that help us or hurt us when stuff like that comes out?
I think exchanges of that.
If the NASDAQ ever did that, they would be in so much trouble. If the New York Stock Exchange ever did that, they would be in so much trouble. It would be ridiculous. And that's the unfortunate part of this, is that there's this gap that if you want to go regulated, you have to be transparent. You can't make it up as you go along.
But Enzo, don't you have to pay the listing fees if you go on the pink sheet? The first I think
I
45,000
just thought, I didn't even
enrollment
understand.
fee.
I just thought it was interesting. I just saw that and I was like, this doesn't help us. It just doesn't help. Have a qualification, have a list of qualifications. If you want to be an exchange or an ATS, tell us what the qualifications are, make it transparent, make the fees transparent, make them flat. The SEC, like NASDAQ, can't just raise its listing fees. They have to get approval by the SEC, and the SEC sends out comment letters, sends out a letter to all of the other exchanges saying NASDAQ wants to raise its fees. Like, what do you think? I mean, it's a very different world compared to the crypto world.
But here's the thing. We're here for crypto for a reason. We're trying to have decentralized, community-driven, transparent environments, right? And on the other side of it, you have the Securities and Exchange telling NASDAQ what to do. We came to the crypto world to have some freedom from government, to some extent, most of us, or to have some alternate ways of regulating ourselves. I'm not saying we shouldn't regulate ourselves, but I think the transparency is important. But if the folks don't charge the fees, how do they survive? How do they run their businesses? And I think it's perfectly acceptable for a legitimate size exchange to charge you fees if they disclose them, yes.
So I'm going to leave it. We got two minutes left. I was going to say, if anybody has any questions, I know that maybe some folks might have some question about their experiences doing STOs, anything in general, please. I know this is an exciting topic, isn't it?
I'd like to address the accredited investor.
And next, lawyers will be on the stage. Thank you.
Please. I'd like to address the accredited investor thing. I think an education-based accreditation would make a lot more sense. And that goes to exactly to your point. If someone passes a test, they need to understand that there's high risk, where there's risk, and that kind of thing. And I think
that's a great idea.
Kaplan. Watch their stock price jump.
Yeah, so then I think you're saying that we could, and that'd be cool because you guys should blockchain that too. If you do the education and you get automatically whitelisted in a KYC, and there's a centralized KYC, and then you can trade these tokens and so on, and and become one of the accredited by learning how to become an accredited. I think that's one of the biggest gaps too. How are you supposed to become wealthy if you don't ever get a chance to invest in hot deals?
it is tricky because all you have is the public markets, and they're they have really high
Right,
PE
ETFs.
ratios, et cetera. And, yeah.
I mean, they love ETFs now. Everybody loves ETFs. There's trillions of dollars going into ETFs. It's like, why? We don't need it. I mean, it just makes bankers make more money. We just need it. So I think we're all on the same side there.
It's kind of funny because I went back and looked at when stocks first came on the scene, like with the Netherlands, and all this stuff was like scams. Everybody said stocks were scams, and selling parts of companies was all a scam. And now we are. We're hearing all the same thing now, and this is all going to work itself out.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Molly. No. Who? Who's? Do we have our hostess with the mostest? Oh, Titus. So next up is the president of Transform Group, Richard Titus. He's joining us from San Francisco. Sorry? And Caitlin Long. Oh, Caitlin Long.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
I was actually joking. I said that to you. Good job.
So I want you to know, I grabbed my bag, my boots to wear for this interview. So,
You spent some time in Wyoming, so you're familiar with the cowboy boot.
my family's from Colorado.
Okay.
So when I first was added to the data Telegram group,
Yeah.
I was like, Wyoming.
A lot of people have that attitude, especially the New York.
If you know anything about
Financial
politics,
Services
you
Elite.
understand Wyoming and Colorado have a long history of sort of, rivalry,
Rivalry,
but friendship.
Yeah, and they're growing apart politically for sure. Yeah.
So Kayla Long and I have actually only met a couple of times in person, but in the virtual world, we have an active dialogue going on. You are like well known to many people in crypto for being the sort of heroic person who's brought law and legislation aligned with sort of some of the values of the crypto world and blockchain world.
Yep.
Tell me why. That's my first
Why
question.
did I do it?
Why did you do it?
Oh, it was a total serendipity. When Bitcoin started running up, I was lucky enough to get in relatively early and decided to donate depreciated Bitcoin for the tax deduction in part, and also because I wanted to solve a problem that I experienced at Symbian, which was how hard it is to find especially senior female engineers. And they command a premium in the market because there are so few, and it's the classic STEM problem. My dad was an electrical engineering professor for 40 years at the University of Wyoming, and so I thought, well, gee, I'll just quietly, try to help solve the problem by donating Bitcoin, and the whole thing, I ran smack dab into the bad money transmitter law that Wyoming had at the time. And I'd been a part of the UW Foundation board for many years and said, all right, we gotta get this fixed. And I'll volunteer my time to get this fixed. I was still at Symbian at the time. And then when I left Symbian, the legislative session was starting, and Tyler Lindholm, who many of you have seen, the 6'7" cowboy with the gigantic cowboy hat, he really gets credit for pushing me to say, what else can we do, what else can we do, what else can we do? And then the whole thing just snowballed. I didn't plan to take the last 2 years off working unpaid, but thanks to Satoshi, I can do that, and I feel like we all have a duty. This is an open source community, and this is sort of open source wet code. In a way, it's available for other states to copy, and this is my contribution since I am not capable of commits to the Bitcoin Core code base, for example. I'm not a developer, so.
Well, so this is what I was going to say. So I wanted to go a little deeper on this for a second, because most people ask you about the laws and they go deep on legislation, but you're actually not a legislator or a lobbyist.
No.
You're a banker.
I'm a kind of definitely a trained banker. I worked on Wall Street for 22 years, and I also have a legal background and a policy background as well. And my passion really is finance. I found out I was much better at numbers than words while I was in law school, so I had sort of an existential crisis of what am I doing professionally, and ended up in finance. But it's sort of the pain points that we heard on the STO panel just a few minutes ago, and I would take them even deeper. I know Enzo asked the question about Patrick Byrne and Overstock wanting to fix naked short selling. That's just one of the many unfair practices on Wall Street that I personally encountered when I was running the pension business at Morgan Stanley, and it just hit me in the gut. And I don't know what it is, but I'm pretty philosophically driven to fix those problems, because I think regular people are being robbed, and all of these channels are legal. And this is, by the way, why you didn't see people in jail during the financial crisis. And there's a perfect example of just one of many of them, which is the SEC green-lighted naked short selling on IPOs 2 years ago. And it made the press on the Uber IPO, which blew up in investors' faces. Right. And having worked in the IPO business earlier in my career, when I read that, I understood exactly what it meant. It meant that broker-dealers make money if the stock goes up and make money if the stock goes down. And so you are privatizing profits and socializing losses, and the people who lost on that were regular investors. What is the SEC thinking? Greenlighting that, and they're supposed to be a consumer protection agency. If those securities were issued on a blockchain.
So you said I can talk about anything.
Yeah,
let's do something totally parallel to this conversation, which is Telegram.
Yeah.
Right. So Telegram is a bunch of American investors.
Yeah.
2 days before the
institutional investors. Yeah.
And non, but qualified investors.
Yeah.
2 days before the tokens are going to be released, they're frozen.
Yeah.
Is that protecting investors?
I don't think so. And again, they didn't end up doing the retail offering that they had set up to do, because they had so many institutional investors signing up for it when they did the first raise. So I don't know the Telegram people. I presume they were working with good counsel. They certainly tried to comply with the law, and it certainly does feel abusive. Yeah.
So this is an interesting thing. Like you won't remember, but I was on my way to Standing Rock, and I actually came to one of the first meetings with a bunch of people, my friend Jill, and some of my other friends who were involved in data, and I was like, yeah, well, that's really cute, but nothing's gonna happen. Went to Standing Rock and like did my little rebellion. And 6 months later, these laws start happening. And like, I'd stayed in the Telegram group, I kind of wasn't paying attention, and I was like, I didn't know about that, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
13 laws.
Yes, and 7 more on the way.
Right.
Yeah.
So talk about these a little bit, like give us a high level, like what are the things that really matter here?
So at a very high level, what we're trying to do in Wyoming, I heard Tron make reference to the red flag laws. We're not talking about the gun red flag laws, we're talking about the old British red flag laws, where the British government mandated that all automobiles had to have someone walking in front of them waving a red flag that to warn pedestrians that an automobile was coming because they were so dangerous. And it prompted the British automobile industry to decamp to the United States, and the U.S. won that war in business, and it was just because it was a stupid regulation. So what I'm really trying to do is to tear down those regulatory obstacles to this industry's development and anticipate attack vectors. So a lot of what we've done, first of all, we took taxes off. So in Wyoming, there's no income tax anyway, but we said we set it up so there's no property tax or sales tax at the state or local level in Wyoming. You still have to deal with federal taxes because you're inside the United States, of course. So taxes is number one. Number two was basic legal clarity, which gives institutional investors something they really need, which is the ability to determine whether they have clear title to their assets. And we look at the tech and say, well, of course I have clear title if I have the private keys. But I'm thinking about attack vectors down the road where somebody alleges that that the crypto that you purchased was, yeah, that's an example, but it's the coin lending stuff that I'm specifically referring to, that you're gonna end up with a lien mess where somebody's gonna claim that they had the legal ownership of that crypto that you purchased, and they're going to sue you. And is a judge going to compel you to give that crypto back? You own the private keys. Well, guess what? They might. And it hasn't happened yet, but as coin lending is proliferating, this is an issue. And I think as crypto goes up in value by a lot, these attack vectors are going to become much more real. And you're just going to have lawyers going after all of us. And so we need to know we have clear title. So those are sort of at a high level the kinds of things we were doing. We have a fintech sandbox, so if there's some financial regulation that you don't want to have to comply with, you can for up to 3 years, as long as you just let the regulators know who you are, and you still comply with consumer protection and anti-fraud laws. You can for 3 years operate outside of the regulations. We took off money transmission requirements for crypto-to-crypto transactions. And then the really big one is the special purpose depository institution. I think a year from now, you're going to see a couple of the major exchanges redomiciling into Wyoming. And for the first time in crypto history, there will be crypto companies that have Fed master accounts.
So much to the chagrin of Dina Titus, the local congresswoman, and a relative of mine, I moved my company to Cheyenne, which is just a family office, but it holds a lot of crypto and a lot of technology assets. And I, looking at the laws, even as a California resident, sadly, it made a lot of sense.
Yep.
And actually, you get all the benefits, or most of the benefits, other than taxation, by doing that.
Yeah, you don't have to live in Wyoming to get the benefit. Set up your own LLC, set up a trust. Wyoming actually, incidentally, also has some of the best trust assets trust laws in the United States. Some of the wealthiest families in the world, in the United States especially, are setting up their dynasty trusts in Wyoming. So Wyoming has become this asset gathering play almost overnight.
Well, this is really interesting, right? So, and then the next question, when I started trying to explain to everyone, and we're going to go to the UCC story in a minute, but I started trying to explain to everyone why I was going to Wyoming from Nevada or from Delaware. And they were like, yeah, but the feds dominate everything. And that's actually not true.
That's not true.
Right.
Yeah.
So talk about that. Like, so why is Wyoming, and we'll talk about what's happened after that, but why can a state have as much power as the federal government?
So the United States is not a democracy, we're a republic. And the republic is the 50 states. And the 50 states have supremacy over the federal government in all areas except those expressly delineated by the Constitution. And the Supreme Court has eroded that a little bit with Commerce Clause litigation that gives more power to the feds. And that's how we ended up in part with the Howey test, which is that the feds have supremacy over securities, but the states have supremacy over property. And so what are digital assets? If they're securities, so the security token offerings, it's very clear that the feds have supremacy. But if it's not a security, then the states actually have supremacy. And actually, the base layer of the legal system, so-called protocol layer, is the Uniform Commercial Code, and that is actually state law. It governs all commercial transactions. Everything from purchasing this cup of coffee to buying crypto is actually governed by state law.
Right, that's super. This is like one of those nuances that people don't get when they read the headlines, and actually the states have a ton of power here.
You bet.
And it's not just Wyoming anymore. So talk about that. Talk about the progress from there.
Well, there are 13 states that have copied at least one of Wyoming's laws, and there are others trying.
Which are they, if you don't mind?
Well, it's interesting. I call it the Rocky Mountain Arc because it starts from the north down: Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah and Arizona. And then there are others. South Carolina's making a big push. There's a talented group of people there who've pulled in some pretty senior legislators. Missouri is as well, yeah.
Right, so let's talk about, I want to talk about a little story, and then we're going to segue into California in AB 1829, I think it is.
Okay.
So when you guys were and I remember the dramatic moment, because there was this Telegram group was going crazy. You were literally getting the first set of laws passed, and a draft UCC law got issued by who?
Okay, so we talk about attack vectors and anticipating them.
The first one happened before you even got the laws passed.
Yeah, well, we looked at, when I talk about the 50 states, there is an effort to make the state laws as uniform as possible, giving heedance to the fact that the states actually do have supremacy, but we recognize, especially in commercial transactions, that we want to have fairly consistent laws. So there's a group that's been around for more than a century called the Uniform Law Commission. And to be honest, I used to respect the work that they did, but given that I've seen how they've operated in this case, the securities industry pretty clearly is trying to use this as an attack vector on the crypto industry. And part of the reason I say that is that there's a group, they just did a big weekend retreat on their fintech law sessions, and the bank lawyers were all over the place, and there wasn't a single crypto lawyer in attendance.
Working on
crypto laws, yeah. And very critical of Wyoming. But what they did, what you're referring to, is they actually sent a letter to the sponsors of the Wyoming legislation, which was going to put a non-uniform law in, and demanded that Wyoming halt its process.
Very similar to the Libra letters.
Yes, and it's interesting because the funny thing is, Wyoming's a very independent state. One of the mottos of the university is bucking the system since 1886, right? So when a globalist organization comes and demands that Wyoming stop innovating, how do you think that went over? It actually ran up the vote count in favor of our laws.
Well, it's funny, all my Colorado family are really annoyed that I'm paying so much attention to the state just north.
Yeah.
But I feel culturally, I'm more Wyoming than I'm Colorado.
Yeah. Well, and there were some things, I'm not saying we got everything perfect. The uniform, if anybody's a lawyer in the room, the Uniform Commercial Code is one of the things that even lawyers hate studying because it's so complicated. But at a high level, what I can share is, and this gets into our California discussion, the Uniform Law Commission proposed a bill that would be a state law to be enacted in all 50 states, that the only way you get clear legal title to crypto assets is if you purchase them through a securities intermediary.
Right, either an ATS or a broker dealer.
Yep. Can you believe this is what was actually proposed? And believe it or not, a bunch of states, including California, proposed the law. And it's been our sort of guerrilla tactics in the crypto industry that's gotten them blocked. Because we are such a decentralized group, and Nevada is one of the states. There was a very powerful member of the committee, a law professor, who actually taught a lot of the lawyers in Nevada. And they were all very proud of themselves. And frankly, again, the securities industry was all over this, and the crypto people were nowhere. And luckily we had enough vocal crypto people in Nevada who testified at the hearing that no, this is not a good idea. And we've got it defeated in every state except for Rhode Island so far. And Rhode Island's going to have to go back and fix theirs because now at least the Uniform Law Commission is acknowledging that they got it wrong.
The crypto wave is spreading now. It's mostly Wyoming. Now, but California, interestingly, where like half the big U.S. crypto companies are headquartered.
For now.
Right. There's some crazy things happening.
Yes, there are.
I don't know if you know Margot here. She's a lobbyist against this law.
Yes, yeah.
AB 1829.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what's going on here.
Well, it's the Uniform Law Commission's proposal. So there are two proposals. It's the URVCBA, Uniform Regulation of Virtual Currency Businesses Act. And one of the things that's interesting about that is that Coin Center was very active in helping to draft that bill. It's not as bad as the other one, which is the so-called Supplemental Act, where there were no crypto people involved in that at all. That one was the securities industry working with
the legal losses are bad, let's make it as hard as possible to slow this down.
Well, they just want to pigeonhole them into the existing legal regime, which says you only get legal status if you buy them through a securities intermediary, and then the securities intermediaries will never integrate, and therefore they stop innovation. Right? Yeah, that's kind of what was, I think, attempted here. And so, California, I'm not politically aligned with the state of California for the most part, but they tend to like to kind of work on these collectivist type of organizational approaches. And it's pretty clear the Uniform Law Commission is pushing something that is a collectivist approach, which would centralize control over this industry. And I don't know why it's gotten the legs that it's gotten in California, given that there are so many companies in California. But I can confidently say that many of them will end up in Wyoming, especially if these bills go through in California.
So I suspect politically we're closer than you think. I was just in Hawaii last week at a conference I can't talk about, but it was interesting. There's a bunch of the CEOs of these companies there. And most of them mind mentioning it to them. Thanks to my friend Margot, it was the first kid ever heard it. And this is, I think, the thing about our industry is we really need to wake up and understand that the regulatory agencies, our government, lobbying, we can't ignore this. We really have to get involved.
Well, I'm not necessarily with the Uniform Law Commission issue saying that it was entirely the securities industry taking it over and it was entirely their fault that there were no crypto people there, because frankly, it was an open meeting.
Right.
But there were no crypto people there. And I think it's interesting, except for me listening on the webcast, but I do think it's interesting that the crypto regulatory people have put money behind DC-based lobbying organizations.
Just happened. That's brand new.
Yeah, and Coin Center and digital security, the Digital Chamber of Commerce, and I'm not knocking the work that they do, but it's all very DC focused. And like you said, unless you're talking about securities or you're talking about derivatives in the commodities area, this is not a federal legal issue. It's a state legal issue.
So Emma Chang and I yesterday did an interview like this, and there are 5 governing organizations plus unknown number of SROs trying to get a piece of the action here.
Yeah.
And right now, if you look at if you do a little chart of what they all think, the IRS, who's not even one of those agencies, is the loudest saying it's property.
Yep.
I would say FINRA is the one saying these are all securities. Nothing to see here.
Right.
And then in the middle are some very conflicting opinions. What do people do right now, would you say? What is the answer right now for people here?
Well, the U.S. is hard, I must say, because of these heavy-handed regulatory approaches, and the SEC, I've been pretty critical of the SEC's action because it really is hurting innovation. And I understand the impetus to leave the United States because of it. But that said, there is a place where this innovation is welcome, and Wyoming has a history of really supporting the companies that come in, especially when the feds go after them. So this is going to be fun to watch. The Wyoming banking division head actually publicly in an interview talked about collaborative regulation. He doesn't believe in regulation through enforcement actions. It's 180 degrees opposite from New York, right? Not only do they enforce through regulatory actions and lawsuits, but they actually, in the Bintrex case, after rejecting the application, they published an op-ed slamming Bintrex. Like, why is this appropriate? It's not appropriate. And so there is a place where you actually have collaborative regulation, where you sit down and you talk about it with the regulator. And you know, I'm not a big pro-regulation person, but with the banking piece, to have our own fiat on and off ramp, we have to be able to play ball with the Fed. And so that's why it has to be regulated. That's why the capital requirements are high. That's why the regulatory headaches are going to be there. But I will say this also, I mentioned this at the Litecoin conference earlier. This Wyoming Special Purpose Depository Institution is the bit license killer.
When do you think the first one's going to open?
Mid-2020, realistically, yeah.
That's really amazing. I have two more questions for you, so we're probably going to run a little over. The first one is, it's a little from left field, but because of your background. Did you see yesterday that Russia is now trading oil in US dollars?
Oh yeah, this has been underway for a long time. So I published a blog post on my blog after I got done taking the Trans-Siberian Express and learned a lot about Russia during that period. And there was a professor on the train, a Russian history professor. One of the things that I concluded is that, you know, we're so in the West, and even in China, so even in Asia, and more in the developed world, we're just so addicted to debt. And all of us have leveraged our balance sheets. And there are a handful of countries, for sure, there are a handful of countries that have been frozen out of the ability to leverage their balance sheets, including Russia, and they're going to end up better off because of it. And the history of Russia is so counter-cyclical to the rest of the developed world, and we're witnessing it yet again. But we're all gutting our balance sheets by leveraging up and living off our future income today. And Russia hasn't had the ability to do that, and they are the sovereign in the world that has the cleanest balance sheet because they just haven't been able to borrow. It's an interesting thought.
That's very interesting. Because I read that blog post, so I was very, very curious. So I think my last question is, what would you tell people? We're like last mic. What would you tell people is their call to action? Like, what can people do today to help move this framework if they support it in their state, if it's not already in place?
Yeah, well, make sure the Uniform Law Commission proposed bills don't pass in your state. Do what the Nevada group did. And I would say also get the crypto tax piece done too. Those are two very basic things that help everybody in the industry. And from the experience in Wyoming, when you came in, the data folks came in, the Shapeshift folks came up from Denver, there was, what the legislators saw in the very beginning was a bunch of people that looked normal, that weren't drug addicts or criminals or gamblers.
There's no Silk Road people there.
Yeah, and also young. A lot of these legislative events, it's true everywhere in all legislatures that the average age is pretty high, and it doesn't tend to be very diverse. And who showed up when I put the call out that we needed the crypto people to make the trek is a bunch of younger, diverse people who were eager to talk and explain and teach, and were not condescending and weren't crazy. And I can't tell you how much that mattered to the legislative process, that they saw a bunch of really eager, normal people.
I just went to the hackathon you had. I encourage everyone here next year to participate. It was fantastic. I had the most fun I've had in 3 days in the Midwest in years. And it was such an amazing group of people. There was like really, some of the really most influential people in our industry, but then young people from the University of Wyoming who just were full of hope and excitement. That building's amazing. So thank you for everything you've done. Do we have time for one question, or am I getting the hook? Can we do one or two? All right, we'll do two questions. Hands up quick. Yeah, in the back row.
I came up. So This is a question about Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Yes.
So my understanding is there's quite a billion, lots of billions of dollars of investment going into Cheyenne and the military complex there. Do you see Cheyenne becoming a real tech hub in the future?
So I happened to learn something along the way, which is that the lowest latency data center at Microsoft in the world is in Cheyenne, Wyoming, because it's on the backbone. And so there are some very interesting incentives that the state has provided to data centers to look at there. Is it feds as well? Yeah. Yeah. And there's accelerated depreciation and the like. So yes, there's a lot of investment going into Cheyenne. It's just booming right now. In part because a lot of people are moving up from Colorado as taxes are going up in Colorado. Cheyenne is 12 miles inside the Colorado border, and it's 90 minutes to the Denver airport. It took me 90 minutes to get to JFK when I was living in New York, so it's just a different distance, but it's the same amount of time.
It's a way better drive, too.
Yeah, it's a small town, and the weather can be extreme. That leaves the riffraff out, and it means that the people who are there are pretty hardy. It's booming, and that's where I think the special purpose depository institutions are most likely to locate. I know one of them, the management team, has already moved there, and that's just simply because Jackson Hole's the other place in Wyoming that people love, and it's got great air service on all the major airlines, but it's so expensive that billionaires are pushing the millionaires out, and so if you're going to put more than 1 or 2 people on the ground, you're not going to be able to find them because they can't afford to live there. So that's why most people are going to Cheyenne.
Hey, one more question in the back.
Yeah. You mentioned the lack of the crypto and blockchain community participating in a lot of the government hearings and things like that. Obviously participating in those things and being a part of that conversation is how you can drive change and influence the outcome. What do you attribute that to? There's some cultural things probably that are part of that, but if collectively as an industry we move forward, we have to be a part of that conversation. So I'm just curious to get your thoughts on what's holding back the industry from jumping in.
Yeah, good question. We don't have big staffs of lawyers like the banks do, whose job it is to keep track of all this stuff. I think it's that simple. And, for those who are willing to volunteer their time, and there have been so many, yourself included, who've come to Wyoming to help us. It's all volunteer. Nobody's making any money. I've not collected money. This is, for the hackathon, it was a nonprofit event. I'm lucky enough to be able to do that. But there aren't a lot of people with that much time to be able to do that. I don't know what the answer is, other than just what we've done is try to deflect when the bad laws get proposed. We just use the community, use Twitter to, make sure people show up and testify against them and try to block it.
I mean, I'll say I made money by moving my family office from Nevada to Wyoming to an opportunity zone. The tax savings more than paid for all the cost and probably 4 kids in 1 year of college, university, $1.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing. Thank you for
Thank
everything
you so
do.
much.
How can people find you?
Mostly on Twitter, at CaitlinLong_, and then Caitlin-Long.com is my blog. I also write for Forbes.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who's up? One, two, three. Check.
All right, good afternoon, everybody.
resounding. No, I'm kidding. It's been a long couple of days. Good afternoon. I'm Manny, Alicandro, and I'm happy to speak with you all today about institutional investing in blockchain space, which I think is a fascinating topic. And we have great panelists here. Looking forward to mixing it up. So how I always start is just do some quick intros and just go down the line here.
So I'm Richard Titus. I'm the president of Transform Group, serial entrepreneur, and probably the only non-institutional finance guy here. Although I probably know a bit more than that, maybe.
I'm Alex Gordon-Grant, founder and CEO of Omega One, and have more than a little bit of experience with those kinds of people.
Malcolm Tan. I'm a practicing lawyer from Singapore. I have my own firm in Singapore, and I'm also the founder of Gravitas International, which is a full-service ICO, STO advisory company, and we deal regularly with all institutions.
My name is Pablo Coirolo. I'm CEO of aeternity blockchain for the Americas, and I, in my prior life, worked close to 10 years in M&A.
Thank you. So I'm an attorney, a New York attorney by way of background. I worked for NASDAQ for many years as a chief compliance officer and as in-house counsel, and I was also in-house counsel for JP Morgan. So I think it's interesting in terms of how I view the market. We're going to get into a really good mix-up here. In terms of how I view the blockchain market, and I compare and contrast it to the traditional capital markets. You know, what does it look like? What's similar? What's different? What can be compared? What can't be compared? And with that, I want to pass it off to the panel in terms of, you know, what are your current impressions? And we'll start with Alex. You know, of the institutional investor space in terms of their involvement with regard to blockchain, crypto, and digital assets presently.
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I want to do something to start with that I think is really important, which is lay out what do we mean by institutional and retail, because those words have really clear meanings in other markets, but it's super confusing in crypto. So, you know, my view is there's a spectrum. There's kind of really truly retail, you know, folks mostly in Asia, sort of day trading and not of interest for our conversation. Then there's kind of professionals who've grown up within crypto and started off as a trader or a few traders. Now they have funds, but like endemic funds in crypto, trade a reasonable amount. The large ones are like maybe 100 million UN. Then you have kind of traditional institutional money that sort of really very little of it has a foot in crypto. Some of those folks, there's, you know, for instance, in Japan, there are people doing a lot of sort of derivatives trading with retail, and then they interact with the markets as sort of FX players. But those are kind of market professionals. When I think like institutional money, I think like, is Bridgewater making bets in this market? Is Tudor making bets? Is Citadel? A Goldman serving those folks? You know, does CalPERS have a position? Is BlackRock offering an ETF? When the answer to all of those questions is yes, which I think it will be, but whether that answer is yes in 2.5 years or 20 years is something I think still in the hands of the people in the industry and how it plays out. But that's what I'm saying, the institutions are there. That is so not there. But there's professionalization in the middle, and the market's maturing really rapidly, and there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. So that's just sort of to frame the conversation.
Right. Thank you. Malcolm. Let me describe the situation in Singapore and a bit in Hong Kong. I think these are the two main financial centers in Asia. So in Singapore, institutional investors such as the Sovereign Wealth Fund, Temasek Holdings, if you guys are familiar with Singapore, has already been investing in the blockchain space and in cryptocurrencies. One announcement that they made last year was that they invested in Binance, which obviously helped Binance get a foothold in Singapore. And secondly, recently there was a exchange license that was provided to an STO platform, and that was a license given out in November last year. Singapore Stock Exchange also invested in this company, and just a couple of months ago, Hanwha Securities invested some money in this as well. So the institutions are really coming into the space.
But that's interesting, you've talked about 3 cases of institutions buying common stock in corporations. none of it. So that's not actually those institutions engaging in crypto, that's those institutions buying stock in companies that are engaging in crypto activities. So I'm curious, like, when do they cross the boundary? When does Temasek decide that it's going to hold 5% or 10% of its portfolio in Bitcoin?
Oh, no, they don't do that.
Yeah, but do you think they ever will?
Yeah, eventually, yes. Okay, so that's the really institutional, right? Okay. Then there's the next category, which is in Hong Kong. There's this group called the Madison Group, and they're a listed company in Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Their traditional business was wine trading and distribution. And over the last couple of years, they made a conscious effort to get into the blockchain space. They have heavily invested into the space. They've spent tens of millions into this. They have substantial digital asset holdings. For example, CoinSuper, which is a Hong Kong exchange, is owned by them. They own many companies in the space, right? So they have substantial digital assets. Another institutional investor, which is needing money from the LPs in China, is also making inquiries into buying the space. This guy has also made substantial money from token holdings over the last couple of years. They invested in the early stage ICOs.
Yeah. One of the things that I see, a tendency, is that the pressure, as we were talking about, is really not coming from within, but from outside. So I think that right now the institutional investors, where large family offices are coming and saying, hey, what are you doing in crypto? And they're like, no, we don't touch crypto. And then they ask them, why are you my banker? Why am I investing in you? So that pressure with the generational change that's happening in the money is forcing them to say, hey, maybe we should have a crypto department and start analyzing what the hell is going on, because our clients are the ones who are calling us and saying, hey, what are we doing in this?
Well, it's interesting. So I, over the last 2 years, have been invited to be a panelist at the Family Office Conference. And the first 2 years ago, most people, I was on this panel, and people were like, what's crypto? And they'd heard of Bitcoin, they'd heard of Silk Road, and that was kind of all the data they had. And this year, it was, what do you think custodian-wise, which country or which state do you think is the best place to do our custodian? So they're learning very quickly, from my experience. But they're still very cautious with the cash. You know, sort of the bigger the fund, the less interested they are in taking the early risk. They want to watch a little bit more. But I think that the thing, what I learned from being a digital innovator for the last 50 years of my life, is that everything that can be digital will be. And the security industry is in the middle of having done to it what the newspapers and the music business and all of the other businesses before it had done to them.
And I think it's just the tricky thing is exponential curves are really hard to predict because they're J-curves, and so, are we 2 years away?
Where are we in the trough of despair?
Exactly.
We're for sure there. How are we on the downslope or the upslope?
Yeah.
I would say that what I've seen three waves of institutional investors. The first wave came in really early, so they came in, they took advantage of the 2016, 2017. They made a lot of money. I know one VC. He set up a 500K fund from his own pocket. He exited 50 mil in 1 year. So
it was a good year.
And then he's back his back. He's not investing in anything now. That's the first phase. The second phase came in on the hype, and all of them lost money. $20,000 all of them lost. And the third phase will be those that are looking at the space right now, waiting for the regulations to kick in, waiting for the custody solutions, waiting for their mandates to be met, and then they'll want to get into the space.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say in the US, West Coast money, Silicon Valley money in particular, got the message years ago. There's no balance noise coming out of the valley. It's pretty much all yay, Bitcoin, a million. But Wall Street...
You're in the wrong rooms.
Yeah.
You're in the wrong rooms.
Let me say that differently.
Yeah. Not the rooms I'm in. They're all like, see, haha, you're wrong. Now come back and do an AI stuff.
To be clear, the ones who made money were making the noise. Right. Now the noise is being made by the ones who were in pain from before. But it's still, by and large, Andreessen, their $1 billion fund, Draper, lots of big names there coming out of it. In terms of Wall Street, in terms of, Connecticut, the sort of secondary market money, Still no big names. I mean, Novogratz is the biggest name from that world. And I mean, honestly, it's not like he left that world on a blaze of glory before he came into crypto. So I don't know, it's curious in Asia, is it the same thing where the sort of the venture capital and equity money sort of seemed the light, put a lot of money in, made money and has something going, and the sort of traditional trading side don't get it, or are the trading people coming on board?
I think the very early stage VCs that made a lot of money are in China. So recently in March I took a trip to Shanghai and I visited 9 VCs. And they were amazing. If you look at the board of all the companies that invested in, it's basically a who's who of all the infrastructure companies. So those got in very early. So most of them came into the space 2013, 2014. So that's like alternate kind of investments, right? Those are VCs that saw the space growing and they came into not the traditional PE guys. PE, practically nobody. I don't see anybody from that space. It's just too small for them.
I think from my perspective, right, you always have to look at incentives. And I think to kind of boil down and distill, what I'm hearing is, what are the incentives for what we can define as Connecticut institutions, hedge funds, banks, JP Morgan? What are the incentives if they're making money, which they are? Why do they want to assume risk, assume liability, and take this on? I don't see them being incentivized in any way. There's no yearning for it. Do you agree, disagree?
But I'm sorry. I think here there's a big difference between Europe, where we have negative interest rates, and the US. And I think that the point now is, yes, in the US, at this moment in time, they're making money, but the Europeans are desperate. And there's an incredible liquidity in Europe, because, as what you were saying, lots of liquidity. And these, where they're getting the pressure from the family offices, hey, find something.
What I've heard about Europe is very interesting. Basically, anybody with deep pockets has 4% to spend, because that's the 4% that they'll be taxed anyway. So they're going to put it into the high-risk investments, and that's where you have the institutional investments. Maybe you can comment more.
Sorry, just on the incentive thing again, I think it's also, we haven't talked about this, but the market structure of Bitcoin is still really immature. And if your job is to look for speculative things, make one trade and then get out 5 or 10 years later on the other end of the fund, it doesn't matter that the transaction costs are ridiculous. Whereas if you're in the business of coming in and out of trades every month, every week, every day, every 17 microseconds, it's a different world. And, but like this, that is literally a matter of market immaturity. The technology is obviously more suited to kind of more real-time situations than currently in Wall Street. So that's where sort of my focus is, if we can get the friction down and make the crypto markets kind of on a structural level more efficient, then it just makes sense. Bridgewater can swing $1 billion back and forth in there and make money, and then they will. If there's an opportunity, they will, and then once that flows in, that just kind of shifts the whole landscape for everyone. So I feel like that's the step change the market's looking for.
That's a great point, but how do we get there? And I'll use a weird analogy. You guys will know I use weird analogies, but we had a very brief blackout in New York in the summer. And
I'm right now in San Francisco.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know what I went through. I can't relate. It's probably so much worse there, but people actually jumped in the middle of the street and directed traffic. So by way of analogy, where regulation doesn't exist, or regulation is pushing things offshore, and we have a decentralized market, how do we, as a community, as an ecosystem, come together to move the ball forward with that landscape? Because I don't see anything coming, any mandate from the Trump administration, any mandate from the regulators. As Richard mentioned earlier, I call it the alphabet soup of regulators attacking each other, double, triple, quadruple jeopardy against the same poor project. So how do we all do that? What's your recommendation of how we move forward?
I have an answer to that question, as you might have guessed, but I want to hear from the rest of the panel first.
Well, I think the space is just too small. The entire crypto market is only, what, 260 billion right now? used to be 830 at the peak, which is not even, not even 1/10 of gold, right? So more traditional money needs to get into space first, and then it'll be more attractive. So most of the crypto funds we see are 5 to 20 mil, which is extremely small for a private equity fund. We are talking about private equity funds, they are looking at least 100 mil and up, right? So they just don't have the tokens to invest in. The size doesn't make sense. The ticket size is just too small. So if the entire space grows, then they'll be more attractive than the institutional investors.
Yeah, probably I think maybe the magic number is $1 trillion. When we get to $1 trillion or, then institutional investors will really consider that this is something they're going to do.
I'm going to take a slightly contrarian view for a second. So 2 years ago, no one institutional was really doing this on the work time, even the weekends. However, if you look at the DeFi solutions, where you're suddenly seeing hypothecation, Caitlin's gone, and you're seeing people do hypothecation, and because they're building smart contracts, because they're doing hedges. And the people doing those hedges are not guys in their underwear, they're money slippers, because they don't need that kind of float. And so we're starting to see a bottoms-up growth of, I believe, a new generation of institutional investors, some of whom are the Gravitas, who've sort of switched lanes, some of which are those young money slipper guys who've now gained up with like 10 of their friends and are now running a fund. I think that it's going to be just like the internet. If you look at media, 10 years ago and 5 years ago, half the companies died, half changed lanes, and half are new firms who came up and forced the change. And that's exactly what's going to happen here, as it always happens in the J group of innovation.
I agree with everything that you all said around this, and then I'm just going to take it down a little into the weeds on this. So the way I look at the issue, there is liquidity in crypto, but the liquidity in crypto tends to exist in fragmented pools, mostly on sort of the large Asian exchanges, Binance obviously being a large one, and because the liquidity is chopped up in lots of different places and with different jurisdictional rules, it makes it hard for market efficiency to sort of create a smooth market. And secondly, because a lot of these exchanges have compliance issues, institutions, the traditional folks, they can only trade on Gemini. Woohoo! No offense, but there's not enough liquidity for me to trade on Gemini.
Yeah.
So really, there's two paths I see for this. One is the traditional path that's happened in all other asset classes, which is over time I'm going to take all the consolidation, and that's fine, except that billions of dollars of investor capital will be burned because it was expecting institutions to come in and be able to lift many more boats. So you can see some years of sort of grinding failures as the mid-tier exchanges all die. Binance will make it, LMAX will make it, a few others will make it, and a slow shift. Or we actually have to change the structure of the markets.
We have to stop trying to regulate back to the past.
Right.
And step into innovator's dilemma and make
Right.
change.
And so the way that I'm actually, funnily enough, working on that thing right now. So we've come up with a model for exchange federation within crypto, where exchanges can essentially pool liquidity, pool collateral, pool other services to make their costs lower, raise the compliance bar across them to get institutions more comfortable, and also have a sort of a multi-exchange token that can do the same kind of thing for all those exchanges as BNB does for Binance. And this is something that's getting a lot of interest from exchanges, because there's this weird world right now where we have all these exchanges that have liquidity but not enough compliance to get institutions. These other folks who have great tech and compliance but no liquidity because it's hard to start from nowhere. All this money is being spent on infrastructure, but it's all just going to get burned and go to nowhere if we don't find a way to create a sort of a sharing, collaborative way to do this. Or it'll just end up like the other markets, and like Hong Kong Stock Exchange buys London Stock Exchange, which bought the Deutsche Börse, which brought the Paris Bourse, and we end up with one exchange holding company in the world. And
And massive non-listing fees.
And massive non-listing fees and monopolies, and we've just killed the very spirit of crypto.
It's not a listing fee.
What about things such as, things that I think are easy fixes in terms of anti-wash sales, implementing surveillance to improve the overall integrity. And you keep hearing about front running, wash sales, even best execution. I know institutional investors are really, really interested in transparency and price discovery. How do we make that happen? It seems to be very difficult to institute something that's somewhat simple to do in the traditional capital markets, but it seems like a very difficult lift in our space.
I actually want to say something about this. Blockchain is supposed to be better at this.
Yeah.
That's not actually how you and I met. I was like, we've invented a technology which is exponentially better at these things. And then somehow we're doing so much worse than traditional capital markets. I agree.
The problem with the crypto space is that the Russians and the Chinese are running things.
Seriously, I'm glad you said that.
Seriously, so all the wash trading is happening in the top Chinese exchanges. Nobody's regulating them because they're illegal in the first place, right? And secondly, all the rating agencies are owned by the Russians, and they don't care. So, yeah.
It's a big problem.
As I was saying, it's not a question of blockchain that we've invented. They're not using it. So if you see most of the processes they have, there's nothing in there that has to do with blockchain. So I think that we need the next generation of exchanges which work like traditional exchanges that we have. And until we get to that stage where you have the New York Stock Exchange or you have somebody who really understands counterparty risk, all the things that you're supposed to have, and implements it on a global scale with liquidity pools, massive liquidity pools, we're not going to get there.
It's interesting too, if you know it's probably gone on now for a couple of years, the numerous, I think it's more than 10 ETF filings on Bitcoin that the SEC has summarily rejected over and over again. And the fundamental reason for the rejection is they are not comfortable with the surveillance that listing market could do on Bitcoin. And we always look at Bitcoin as the beacon, but yet the biggest regulator in the world is not comfortable enough to approve an exchange-traded fund or exchange-traded note on Bitcoin. I think that is demonstrative of the perspective of the market, to me, from how the regulators view the market. Where do you think we need to go in terms of, I think the Federation's a great idea, but in terms of getting the mass adoption, do we need, for example, do we need someone like Ray Dalio, do we need a Bridgewater to kind of step in? And is it a follow the leader kind of thing where a couple of these large hedge funds increase their alternative investment percentages and then others will follow?
So I think firstly, there's like two parallel but different things to look at. Because one is, people choosing to slowly up their Bitcoin holdings to pour money into the space increases the AUM. And then the second is, what's the frequency of trading? Because, a fund that decides to go, okay, I'm going to allocate 2% to Bitcoin and buy and hold, isn't going to give that kind of market growth. It'll give AUM growth, but a fund that says, you know what, I'm going to allocate $50 million to, market neutral trading every day is going to actually create more flow. And I don't know. I kind of think, I agree completely with what Rich is saying, which is that most of where the innovation and interesting things are happening, there are some brilliant sort of small startup hedge funds in the space that are bringing, Bill and Marissa doing, bringing sort of commodities, tech, and things over into the space. At some point, it's going to become economical for the big players to move money around, and when they do, they'll have been trading for a year before you hear about them, or 6 months. And then we'll know and we'll see. Just what's real, again, it's hard for us to tell where we are on the S-curve, and there's still, I think, two very different paths that can play out. One where we as an industry do the things we need to advance the marketplace and sort of nudge things to a place that we can get that virtuous circle going. And the other is we don't quite make it and grind along sideways, and then essentially all the exchanges that raised, whatever, I don't know how long it takes back to spend $180 million. But I mean, exchanges raise a lot of money that they're not going to be making back on trading fees anytime soon. And if all of those exchanges go bust and then cause the issues for their LP and all of that, that's going to set the whole space back years. So that to me is really the binary that we don't know whether we're going to sort of make it of the rising tide will lift the boats before the boats sink, I guess.
Do we have time? We're running out of time. Do we have time for a quick question? Any questions? All right. I want to thank our distinguished panel. Thank you so much. It was great. Thank you.
If I could have my panel up here. Photos much appreciated, by the way. Tag CoinAgenda. Hashtag CoinAgenda. Hashtag biggest blockchain week. Yeah. There we go. So here is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I have this vision of the entire world adopting a decentralized blockchain solution for finance and having to revert back to, personal responsibility and self-reliance. I think the world will be a better place, and I have the best panel to have this conversation. I'm going to start at the end here and have them introduce themselves.
Alex Washitsky, Celsius Network. We're on the road to decentralization.
Sean Owen, currently with Echo.
He needs a microphone that actually works.
Check now. Okay, Sean Owen with EquiStart, previously also Sol, currently, and working on digital cap tables, securities, lending, and other things related to this.
Anthem Mike Blanchard, Anthem Holdings Company, Hercules Enterprise Grade Software, and Anthem Gold Stablecoins, and working toward commercialization of Bitcoin toward world peace. So, thank you.
Awesome. So I want to start at the end here, and I want to ask you, what is decentralized finance? How should the mainstream news be reporting what this is and what it means to them?
So we started with not your keys, not your Bitcoin, but that covers 1/1000th of 1% of all the people that live on the planet, right? So I think decentralized means for 7 billion people that live on this planet means I don't have to learn anything new, I don't have to do anything new, and this magical wallet or app or dApp acts in my best interest. And I know a lot of companies are working on that, but we're not there yet, right? That's what I'm saying. We're on the road to decentralization. Celsius is one leg in the centralized world and one leg in the decentralized world with 25 blockchains that we support. And it's because you want to onboard 7 billion people, you got to give them something they can digest and give them a key or a set of keys. It's a guaranteed recipe for disaster.
Yes, it is. And you actually brought something up that I'm so glad you did. A wallet or an app. I swear to God, this is the #1 thing. Language barriers. Everybody knows what an app is. Can I hear an amen? How many of you know how to download an app? No problem. A wallet? What the fuck is that? That's the hard part. Trying to change them to teach them how to do crypto, that's never going to happen. So I love that you said app.
Well, look at this conference. I mean, we know most of the people here.
Yeah.
And this is how many years we've been coming here? So
10, 12.
Exactly. So when are we going to realize that, Einstein's definition of lunacy is doing the same thing every year and thinking you're going to get different results. So we got to change what we're doing because we're not attractive to 7.5 billion people. It's great for the community, it's great for the hardcore guys and gals, but You want mass adoption? You want a revolution? Hey, Bitcoin is 11 years old. You know, it's not like...
But there's only 21 million Bitcoin, and it's not even enough for one millionaire. One per millionaire.
And then soon the number of people who lost their keys is going to be greater than the number of people who still hold their keys.
2,500 Bitcoin, I don't know where it is.
Yes.
You can try for me now.
And the best, look, I'm not going to name names, but the most famous people in the industry have all lost keys. Okay? I mean, it's just horrible. It's like, so when are we going to learn that that is not a solution?
Yes. Sean?
So I totally agree that we're on the road, we're not there yet. And when you think about decentralization, I think the promise has always been for us to be our own bank, and I think that's better stated now, to be our own financial institutions. And ultimate decentralization would be that every one of us on the planet has the ability to do that. So how do we get there? I think it's technology that will empower that. That's fairly obvious that decentralized finance is going to be powered by the ability for tools to allow us to get there. But we live in this world right now where we have to still emulate something in between, where we have institutions, we're all institutions, and we're just getting further decentralized. So we've got to figure out how to accelerate that. How do we bring more people in, and how do we get further out to the fringe edge where every single person is participating, and that's what you brings value into the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's really well said. Obviously, experts in the panel with tremendous success, and we have to eat our own dog food, so to speak. So decentralized finance is decentralization, and really we can achieve that through these layers, right? Each one of these public protocols is ultimately a layer, and they're really specific computers, and they're incredibly efficient. They're like hundreds or maybe even thousands of times more efficient than even like the most powerful centralized clouds out there. So I think it's a matter of layering and then applying these communities, which are voluntary marketplaces, and ultimately people get to choose to interact, and we can shift commerce slowly, maybe then pretty quickly, just like we saw the proliferation of the internet, cell phones, smartphones, cloud. I mean, the list goes on and on. So it's an extension of computing. I mean, that's one of the achievements I think that we've had more than anything is communication breakthrough of starting to remove the word blockchain from the conversation, starting to remove the word crypto from the conversation, and start introducing the word software, applications, basic, cybersecurity, ultimately basic concepts that people already understand.
For me, it's a lot like when we went from CD to DVD. They already understood the format, and then they just went, oh, it goes from music to videos. I get that. That's why I love the idea of just stop calling it a DApp, stop calling it a wallet, call it an app. And then they go, oh yeah, I need that.
Let me add one more thing. So I wrote the VoIP protocol, Voice over IP, in 1994. October of 1994. And by March of 96, every user was using a name instead of a TCP/IP address. So that was like a year and a half of moving from writing a whole set of numbers, asking you first, what's your TCP/IP address? Okay, let me put it in my computer. Okay, can we create a socket? Too many hops. Let me reinitiate that, right? So for me, it's like seeing the same movie all over again. It's just the first time the movie was 30 seconds, and now the movie is like 11 years, and it's not ending.
It's 26 hexadecimals, and I'm sorry, but most people can't even do basic math.
Now I understand it's money. Of course, if I call the wrong phone number, I just redial. But and with money, there's no calling.
Oh, there's no go-backsies. There's no go-backsies. That is the big. That's why I say personal responsibility and self-reliance, right? You send it to the wrong wallet, you gotta hope that that person is honest enough to send it back.
You sent it to the wrong app, not the wrong wallet.
Oh, sorry.
Right,
Yes,
exactly. Very good. But my point is, like again, we're all technologists here. We can figure this out. But we're holding ourselves backwards. I mean, we have half of the community keeps starting on Twitter every day. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin. He's a traitor. He wants to take us back into the banking era.
So let's talk about banking. So I have issues with banks, but I also like the fact that, like most people, and believe me, I'm not a subscriber to victimhood ever. However, I do like being able to call my bank and going, I didn't make that charge. Can you give me a credit? And they go, sure, no problem. We'll give you a temporary credit and we'll issue a chargeback. That's not really possible in crypto. And then the other piece of that is nobody knows what toys I just bought because there's no transparency because it's private. So can we talk a little bit about the fear that the public is going to have about finance and potentially people seeing their transactions and how the decentralized finance community is actually handling that. Like, if I know somebody's wallet address, I can see how much money they have.
So you're the reason why we're paying 24% on our credit cards.
I'm sorry.
Because people that call and say, I didn't make this charge, are the ones who got us to that price, right? Look,
no, it's because every
I'm
time I
kidding.
get gas, somebody hacks my freaking credit card. I've had to get a new credit card 4 times in 3 months.
I did the same thing. Just,
FML.
It's crazy. So that system just doesn't work, right?
No,
So we all collectively paying for the fact that 10%.
23% fraud?
I'm saying the fact that 10% of the population is defrauding 90% of the population. So it's like, and I'm not talking about healthcare. I'm talking about credit card.
That's a whole other panel.
So here we have the tools to create this finality of a transaction, but we have to be responsible, right? And the problem is that we created some of the rails, but not all of the rails. And so we're touting all this beauty of blockchain, decentralization, and everything else, but we can't deliver that end-to-end service yet.
But are consumers ready to be responsible?
No, they're not. And you have to put them in a walled garden inside the app where you realize who's a good actor and who's a bad actor. You kick out all the bad actors, and you let the good actors do what they're supposed to do. And again, we're on the second movie of decentralization. The first movie was the internet itself. We're now trying to kind of get stolen from us.
That thing that was never going to catch on, that one?
Facebook is now 60% on the internet, right? So we got centralized yet again. And now here's our opportunity to get decentralized a second time. You know, are we going to do it?
Made me think of a really good question, but Anthem's Gabati were just telling me he has a conversation about transparency.
Well, it's great. I think the raw reality is that we're still a hobby, right? I mean, there's no enterprise, like, I don't think in the world, very few that have any material anything that use Bitcoin or Ethereum or EOS or
No, they're going to make their own.
as a chassis, right? So, I mean, we're still pre-commercialization.
How about the country of China?
I was going to say, China's doing it.
Well, the one chain doesn't work, right? And so, because these are specific computers, and the key question is the data changeable? If the data is changeable and corruptible, it's a database masquerading as blockchain, and blockchain is really masquerading as a public protocol. So the key question is the date timestamp corruptible? If the answer is yes, then it's a database, right? The achievement's been, right, really advanced, and obviously the boy was incredible, and really personal computing really brought from the mainframe this idea of accessibility to the individual, cloud, internet cloud, Bitcoin, now all these public blockchain protocols, and I think that's the opportunity, looking at like a lambda stack layering, looking at like OSI models.
Yeah, but look, China is creating a private blockchain for 1.5 billion people. They're not saying it's going to be a public open ledger. Everything we're talking about here, they're laughing at us. They're like, really? That's what you're going to build?
Well, they are going to laugh. They also have a swine flu epidemic that's just decimated about a quarter of all of their food supply, and they're starving. So the reality is China can wrap. I mean, I had the honor of speaking at a Silk Road UN event in Kazakhstan here in Astana, and the reality is Cisco, IBM, all this database equipment is corruptible. So all you do, you just spread your corruption network. I mean, every government's a forced marketplace, and China is just a massive one. So it's just all these attack factors, and now you add 5G. Now you're just exponentially.
I wouldn't discount. Look, fearing your enemy is defense number one, right? If you think that nothing's going to happen there, I'm not sure that's the best defense. I think, again, when the internet was born, you had Prodigy and IBM, right? IBM and Sears got together. Then you had Microsoft creating intranets, and you had the public internet. The public internet won because most of us adopted the public internet. Here, there's no guarantee that the adoption will come to us. Definitely not if we continue doing what we do.
Okay, I want to talk about public adoption, okay? Because China is now, I mean, we saw a Bitcoin bump the other day because China has basically said...
Because no one knows how to read Chinese. If they read actually the language of what Mr. Xi said, he said blockchain, he didn't say the word Bitcoin once.
He didn't say Bitcoin, but we still got the bump. But here's the deal. So our government is giving Libra such trouble right now. And my personal philosophy, do I trust Facebook? Well, I live on Facebook, so you can easily find me, ADRYNN, I'm everywhere. But Literally my life is on Facebook. So do I trust them? I trust them to read all my messages. But if they create Libra and they create this consortium of a bunch of other companies that pretty much own me, but it's an American-based company, someone is going to go global. Do you agree or do you disagree that somebody's going
I think
global?
Facebook versus
Definitely global. I mean, it's already global, right? Facebook is global. We have these barriers up, and I think that all the parts are here. Like, they just have to continue to build. I feel like it's kind of the calm before the storm right now. And it's a matter of, can we connect all the things we all know? Like, you've said some brilliant things, you've said some brilliant things. We all in this room have pieces of the puzzle. How do we just put that together so you get the benefit of us all being decentralized, but we get the cooperation of everything working together so we can compete against what's the alternative, which is just a highly centralized force.
So my concern is that China's going to get there first. I almost feel like we're in a space race again. And that Dubai
Is it the winner take all? I mean, if they get there today, does it matter?
I don't know, because it depends on how they name it. It's really going to be a brand issue. Is the brand that they come up with going to be Chinese characters, and Americans are going to go, yeah, I'm not using that. Like, I use WeChat.
They're going to call it TikTok, and we're all going to use it. You know?
And then we're all going to use it.
WeChat is not very good. I mean, I always hate using it.
I'm in a group with a whole bunch of Chinese billionaires. Trust me, it's the only reason I use WeChat.
The issue is going to be, is the dollar going to stay the reserve currency of the world? Or
No.
the Chinese going to basically take over the dollar? Because
It's the Saudis, it's not the Chinese. The Saudis are creating an oil coin there.
The Saudis don't have enough people. They don't have enough
They don't
people on
need the
planet.
people. All they have to do is make it not trade oil in dollars, and we're done. So we really should say, okay, if we're going to have a world currency, maybe it should be an American company, because that might just, I don't know, save us.
Or there's another radical potential that maybe we're moving back into an era of barter because we have perfect accounting, and maybe we can remove the third-party conduit of money, which is really violent currency. So we get direct access to the good and service, really, with the public protocol access key. So maybe we can eliminate the idea of needing to have a reserve currency. Maybe ultimately Bitcoin becomes, the Satoshis become the reserve, but it's more like taking out the centralized security physical layer of the internet and replacing it with miners instead of centralized internet exchanges. I mean, this might be where we're going. Maybe this is how we achieve world peace and get away from war. Because the reality is we have energy weapons that go hundreds of thousands of times faster than missiles today on all military equipment of any name in any major country. And we're just one minor database mis-upgrade of one new feature that wasn't plugged correctly, and one smart, Einstein, Gautier kind of savant who's pissed off at something, and he creates a virus, and it has, intention of going one place and it ends up going everywhere, and things happen, right? We need to get away from corruptible databases. I mean, the collusion, ultimately war is the ultimate end result of collusion, and that's prisoner's dilemma game theory. Because we've had corruptible history, we've never had this option of being able to actually work together, because it's been impossible to prove without a doubt that what you did before, actually you did. So it's impossible to prove good actions, so bad actions are corrupt. Corruption databases are corruptible.
I love that,
Using
because
corruptible ledgers.
as a parent, I have to deal with Common Core. I'm no longer, thankfully, my child graduated early, but I want to say it's in Kentucky, their science books and their history books don't even include dinosaurs. So I was like, that's corruptible. So I want to talk about consumers and mainstream adoption. So, we have this whole concept of usury, and we have this concept of, things costing too much and the dollar loan centers and things like that. When I'm putting crypto in and I want to borrow, it's pretty expensive. Can we talk a little bit about that? And how we can fix that? Is the price going to go down?
I'm not allowed to say any more things about DeFi. No, just kidding.
Without naming names. I'm just
kidding.
Conceptually.
Every day I say bad things about banks, and so no, look, I love DeFi, right? I mean, DeFi is the future. The problem is today, DeFi is like an exclusive club where you're only allowed in if you have a third degree in computer science. Okay. So not just that you have to trust Bitcoin, but you have to know, or Ethereum, you have to know what a smart contract is and how the stuff works and all that stuff. And then you have to know 10 other things for you to use Maker or use Compound or use anything else. And then when you use those services, when you land, it's 5-point-something%, and when you borrow, it's 11%. So how is it better than a bank? I mean, a smart contract should give 95% of the value.
I get bank money for 3%.
To the
so how are you going to convince a consumer?
95% of the value should go to the depositor if it's a smart contract. So all I'm saying is DeFi needs to do better for it to become a viable solution, and then it needs to be a dApp that everybody can download, that they can just say, oh, I can take my dollars and it's yielding 7% for me. I don't know about Ether, I don't know about DAI, I don't know about anything else. So by not solving any of those things, all we're doing is creating more money for toll collectors who are already squeezing us for in the crypto community, right? So what are we replacing? JP Morgan with a toll collector who's like among us, one of the guys among us? We haven't done anything there.
Yeah, but our guys are getting a Lambo, and the JP Morgan guys are getting like a $15 million bonus, so...
You want this room full?
Yes.
Pay people 7% interest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to challenge that it's actually that cheap to get bank money. I mean, sometimes you can get bank money that looks like it's that cheap, but it's usually on an AM table, right? So it's like 80% it's total, just the way that they do it. It's like if you read through the terms, it's actually completely ridiculous, but they frame it in a way that looks like that's what you're going to pay. That's not what you're going to end up paying. And then also the second thing is, right now, that's mostly not true from the standpoint of credit cards, right? That's like 22, 23% before anything else.
US average 24.7%.
Yeah, so
1.7 trillion.
Which I think is ridiculous, because 25% is usury, but if you add up the way that a lot of these things are daily compounded interest, it's like 90%.
So we have to create better tools, right? And I agree with him. When people can sit there and say, I'm making better money here, then it's not subjective anymore. It's not about like your opinion, it's just very much about math. And everybody gets that. It's like the same with technology.
Consumers can't do math. This is what I said at the very beginning. Consumers can't do math. They have a hard time with basic math, and then they need to use their phone with the calculator. I want to know from you, how are we going to get consumers to actually adopt decentralized finance? What are your best ideas for mass adoption?
Also, to follow up on your point about barter, we bartered our liberty for greed, right? That's what we've done. That's capitalism, I'm sorry. Right?
Well, no, not for greed. For
greed.
Hold on. What's the quote?
The most profitable companies in America extract profit from the poorest Americans, poorest people around the world, and give it to the rich people. Okay? I have a JP Morgan stock. I get a dividend every quarter. Where did that dividend come from? A big chunk of it comes from charging the poorest American overdraft fees and monthly fees and fuck you fees and everything else.
I hate those freaking fees.
So I know. So why can't we have more companies like Apple that act in your best interest? Why do we have to?
Capital One did it. They did a Spark business card, a business checking account, no fees, no overdraft, no nothing. It's awesome, and then they shut down the program.
Alex is the answer. I think the answer is we have to do the best thing. We have to do what's right, and we have to act in the best interest of the end user. That's the answer. We have to make it so easy and safe and strong that it's just obvious, that's a better solution.
So tomorrow when WC opens up, go on the floor and show me how many companies there act in your best interest or are there to solve your problem.
I am, because I'm a naughty dating app for good girls that gets women laid.
Great, but my point is,
and that solves a very, very critical problem, because if women are happy, then the world is at peace.
It's true.
I'm creating
I'm
world
not
peace.
going to comment on that.
I know you're not. That's why I said it, because I knew I could get that.
Well, and just
who can solve world peace faster?
Getting to that point, I think it's about commercialization. What you're describing as prisoner's dilemma game theory, it's completely a result of having the inability to have trusted history. It's been a result of that, and since January 3rd, 2009, Bitcoin gave us this opportunity. Now our challenge is, how do we scale? And really, I think it deals with the volatility, right? I mean, you look at just the cost of using Bitcoin as software. Over the last 2 years, it's oscillated 10,000 times, right? Sometimes it costs like a penny or less. Sometimes it costed over $100 over the last couple of years.
It was crazy.
Right?
It was $40 for a cup of coffee.
Oh, right. So exactly. So, but again, like the business is simple. You got to budget for things, and you need predictability, right? I mean, you need predictability, and the way we can get away from prisoner's dilemma game theory is by harnessing the trust that we have with these public protocols, as long as the networks hold, of course.
But Bitcoin is a doomsday insurance. It's not a payment protocol, right? So, unfortunately, I mean, I would love for it to be the protocol to be designed a little bit differently.
It's okay though, because it just needs to do one thing.
No, I love it. I love it as a store value.
It's like but it does something more actually. I would argue that it also is the world's best notary public. By being incorruptible, it gives us a new foundation in that we can anchor other, not just like second layers like Lightning or Factum or Counterparty.
We just haven't found that second killer app. That's the problem.
Well, I think you have to stack it. I mean, again, like we'll toot a little bit of our horn with Hercules, but we basically, like Julie's here, our CTO's in the audience. If you want to talk to tech, she's the person to do it with. We basically created a wrapper like a LAMP stack Linux, and basically like a Red Hat equivalent. And we think that that's the solution.
So what gets your protocol to mass adoption? I mean, I think that's the question that we all as an industry are struggling to answer.
I think where we focus is where the incentive is correct, and that's where businesses are majority owned, because that's where the incentive is to protect themselves from all the theft that's happening to themselves in the organization. Because if it's a big company that's stratified and there's no majority or controlling person, the problem is everyone's always trying to legally steal as best they can and take as much as they can. That's why we have like Sears Roebucks or Woolworth, right? Things just dissolve over time because no one cares enough and everyone steals. So I think the focus is legacy, top, and then bottom, the kind of Uber Eats phenomenon, places like Indonesia or India, where you have like one person shacks and then all the ingredients go to the shack and then Uber Eats then delivers out. That integrity, or like artists in parking lots selling art. I mean, you can bottom up and you can also top down from, wholly owned family business conglomerates that are multi-billion.
By the time that happens, China's blockchain is used by
We're almost out of time. We're almost out of time, and I have one more critical question for mass adoption. So right now, the entirety of marketing is always on brand awareness and brand trust. And one of the key things in blockchain is that things can be trustless. How are we going to move consumers from saying, I trust, Shell oil versus Chevron oil, or I trust Amazon instead of Amazon for 2 days.
It's got to get into the hardware too. Like, but again, it's a chicken egg, with commercialization, because there's already
consumers don't understand hardware.
Well, and exactly, it needs to be intuitive to them. They have to not think about it. That's like that, like an iPhone.
Well, that's what Tangent did. It's literally a card. It looks like a credit card, and you just touch it, and it's like they go, I get that form factor. So that works. But this whole idea of trustless, right? I'm sorry, I like to trust people.
I mean,
so I know.
That's your point, is that stop marketing it that way, right? Just make it to where people trust it rather than saying trustless.
Will trustless be a brand competitor to I trust Bank of America or I trust Wells Fargo when we're talking about financing people's money? And we say, it's trustless, it's peer-to-peer, it's whatever, it's decentralized.
It's great for the anarchists. It doesn't work for, 90% of the population. So, and we've proved that, right? Again, we're 11 years at it. We started with the anarchists.
No, because they think it's for drugs and prostitution.
No, look, I used to be a black hat. I'm an anarchist. I'm not I don't do it for drugs. I mean, I never did drugs, but I just hacked everybody. But
I got to break into banks for a living. That was my favorite.
The point is, again, you have to hide all that complexity. How do you use voice of IP? You see somebody's name, you click on it.
Yeah.
It has to be that simple, right? And
that's
the network on the back end needs to know AI plus the blockchain plus the open ledger needs to say, oh, you have never sent anything to this person before, and this person hacked 7 other people. We're flagging and blocking the transaction. Right? So the technology needs to hide the complexity and give you an idiot interface, idiot-proof interface that allows you to make mistakes and not lose your life saving.
Okay, last final thoughts because we are out of time. Sean.
Okay, yeah, so the one thing I think is missing here is that we need to just use what we've already built and support what already exists. There's actually some really great services right now that you don't have to think about anything. You don't have to know private keys. You don't have to.
Talk about Celsius?
Well, that's one for sure. Yeah, there's many more though. And if we just use the products and services that exist instead of everybody being illiquid and reserved and kind of waiting for somebody else to come along and wave a magic wand and fix everybody's problems, we are the network. Let's do it now. We can use the products that work. That's what drives value. That's what drives price, that's what drives liquidity, that's what drives everybody back in here, and that's what gets a whole new set of new people to come in and say, okay, this makes sense, right? If we're all sitting around illiquids, not doing anything, waiting for somebody else to fix the problem for us, wanting the best perfect user interface for whatever, then we're not even paying attention to the thing that already exists. And it's been shocking to me to come to these lately, and it's the same people, but I don't think anybody in the room even knows what the other people have already built. So let's support the products that already exist, and everybody doesn't have to be, it's not a one-person win situation, it's a we all win, including everybody else that's not in the conversation yet. So I think that's the key way to make it work.
That's wonderfully said right there, and I love that idea, collaborate, and that's the beauty of this game theory. We have to put one step still in this whole prisoners dilemma and kill or be killed world. However, we're all moving in the world that we're on, and it's actually value add. So the cool thing is that layering actually helps our wealth effect. Whereas in the old corporate world, layering would kill you because you would then have that information be out colluding you by another group that a person that worked with. So that's the beauty. So, but thank you. I think that's really very common.
More utility, less volatility.
Oh, I love that. And with that, I am going to say adieu. Thank you for coming to our decentralized finance panel. And if I could have the next panel come up, that would be absolutely amazing. Thank you to my wonderful panelists. You guys
I think we're closing it.
Huh?
I think we're in.
We're in?
No, I can top it.
Oh, I was like, do I have to do my little tap dance?
Keep going.
I generally have to always stall for time when I MC things and I end up tap dancing, so thought I'd just throw that in. There is a cocktail party at 5:30, and it is in 3 minutes, and it is where? It is at the Marquee Club. So I will see you all at the cocktail party. Bring your bag.
Right, safety is not the right word.
I was ready for it.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. That was like, make me sit.
I go by the Liberty Line.
Adrian, did you give everybody the directions to the closing party? Sorry. Markley should be on. Okay, great. So 2 minutes, and we have to see whether we went secret or straight. So at the start of CoinAgenda, we were at $9,030. We had 11 CoinAgendas in a row. The closing price of Bitcoin at the final moments of the conference were higher than the opening price. So we have to beat 9,030. We're at 93.25. Now 12 for 12.
Undefeated.
CoinAgenda bump.
Going downstairs to the Marquee. I want to sleep on my team and
That was super fun.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah,
As always.
Oh, as always. You guys were fun to watch. I love the dance.
We should do the dance
Anyways, that's great panel.
Actually, and this is our team.